Hello everyone. I am your dark narrator here to guide you today. I know many of you use this video to help you drift off to sleep, but before you do, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also drop a comment letting us know where you're from and what time you're watching. Now settle in, get comfortable, and relax. All it took for my life to be turned upside down was a few words. Now, I don't mean that a doctor told me that I had cancer, or a woman on the other end of a telephone confirming that I had won the lottery. What changed my life was a piece of information, harmless on its own. It was back in 2006, and I was just 15 when it happened. I remember it so clearly even now. It was a frosty December afternoon that was knocking on Christmas's door, and somehow I had managed to score a date with a pretty girl called Claire. I really pushed the boat out by booking us a reservation at a pretty mediocre Italian chain restaurant, but when you're 15 and living off pocket money, that's a pretty big expense. Claire was way out of my league, and we both knew it. You're probably wondering what about me that could attract a girl like that, and to be honest, I never knew either. I was a fairly unremarkable kid, average looking and average intelligence, not particularly charming either. Unsurprisingly, the date went horribly. She made it pretty clear that she wasn't that interested in me at all and sat texting for most of the meal. I tried to make small talk about school, but I'd get hit with one-word answers and shrugs. I asked her out with a screw it, what the worst that can happen attitude, and I couldn't believe when she agreed. Her boyfriend was some older guy that had just dumped her, and I had heard her sob about how Anthony is such a prick. I was an unashamed vulture who saw its chance. After dinner, I suggested we go see a movie, but she was adamant that we walk to the pier as there was a fun fair in town. I agreed, of course, knowing that if that beautiful creature had suggested we go to watch cows meeting their end at the local abattoir, I would still have said yes with the same enthusiasm. After the short walk from the restaurant to the pier, I realized that she was only at the fair to meet her friend Roxy, and that I would soon be surplus to requirements. So our date morphed into a friend's night out right before my eyes, and there was nothing I could do but smile as my faint hope of an under-the-boardwalk make-out session evaporated. The awkwardness of that night still lives on inside me, even after all that has happened since. The girls would barely speak to me as they bounced from stall to stall at the fair, laughing and flirting with the guys who ran them. I remember how angry and hurt I was when Roxy referred to me as a weirdo. Some weirdo from our school, I think, was the term she used when asked who I was. I hated that word, and I hated the way Claire laughed at it. Anyway, you're probably wondering what all this is about, and it does have a point. I'm just providing a bit of background information so you understand where I'm coming from. There was this one little stall at the very end of the pier. A lot of people probably never even noticed it, as it was covered with a dark tarpaulin which blended it into the blackened sky. I'd only noticed it because I was swinging on a stool at the skee-ball stall, trying to look anywhere but at my date, who was rubbing the attendant's arm, telling him how strong he was. Something about it kind of drew me in. It was so unremarkable compared to all the other stalls with their flashy lights and blaring horns. A tatty piece of wood hung over the front with the words, "Your last," etched on it. I cautiously approached, half expecting to see some hideous witch-like woman staring back at me. I was pleasantly surprised when I saw the attendant, though. She probably wasn't much older than me, with a freckled, pretty face and big auburn eyes that furrowed as I approached. I gulped and looked at the sign and then towards her. So, is this some sort of racing game or something? She stared back, confused. "What are you talking about?" she mumbled in a thick Eastern European accent. "You just spin wheel and I tell you future." She gestured to a rickety old wooden wheel which hung on the far wall. All around it were tabs which read things like meal, drink, movie, kiss, and so on. "See?" She gestured her hands again in a spinning motion. It was then that Claire and Roxy approached from behind me, all of a sudden interested in this game. I remember thinking how strange it was that they could ignore me all night. Then the second I start conversing with another girl, they wanted to know what I was up to. "Ooh, this looks fun. Can we have a go?" Claire sweetly asked the girl. £1.50, one spin, I tell your future." Both the girls looked at me expectantly with big, pretty eyes, and with a defeated sigh, I hand over a £5 note. "One spin each, then," I said, keeping my hand outstretched for my change. The girl shook her head and gently pushed my empty hand away. "Is good luck to tip fortune teller, yes?" Without even pausing for my response, she turned to the girls and asked, "Now, what are your names?" They looked at each other, giggling away at the apparent silliness of the situation. "I'm Claire and this is Roxy." No, 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 said the girl. I need you family's name. It's very important to know your past before you know your future. Well, mine is Smith and hers is McDonald. Good. Now, Miss McDonald, would you like to do spin first? The girl took a few steps to the back of the stall, closing her eyes in concentration, and letting Roxy take center stage. Roxy, all smiles and giggles, approached the wheel and gave it an excited spin. The old wood creaked and crackled around for a good 30 seconds before it landed on film. We all turned to the fortune teller expectantly. Her eyes were closed, but her eyelids flickered in a strange way, like broken shutters on a window. The last film you will ever see will be The Jungle Book, she whispered eventually. Oh man, I love that movie, Roxy joked. Does this mean I can't ever watch it again? No, 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 this is not what it means. It means it will be last film you see. So maybe you watch it tonight and nothing, then you watch in 50 years in POW. She clapped her hands together loudly on the last word, and all three of us jerked in shock. My turn next. Claire brushed me out of the way and spun the wheel. Again, it spun for around 30 seconds. This time it landed on person you will make love to. The girls began cackling like schoolgirls, which I suppose was what they were anyway. The name of the last person you will make love to is Anthony, the fortune teller whispered. With that one word, Claire and Roxy erupted in howls of laughter and repeating how that was so weird that she knew that name. They walked away totally oblivious to me, texting their friends to tell them of the funny thing that had just happened. You are not Anthony, no? The fortune teller asked sympathetically. I shook my head. That's her ex's name. I figured that she had just picked the first name that had popped into her head, and it was just my luck that it was his. After that, I decided just to take my spin. I had paid for it and I was cheap. And then go home. We went through the same drill as the girls and mine landed on song. The fortune teller took a while to tell me my fate, just fluttering her eyelids. I grew tired of it quick and went to leave, not really caring for that stupid game anymore. The band are Providence backwards, she shouted at me as I walked away. The song will be called Fortune. I gave a sarcastic thumbs up and kept walking, telling myself how stupid I was to think a girl like Claire would have anything to do with me. You can imagine my surprise then, when I felt warm fingers interlock with mine, and I looked up to see her sweet face. She apologized for walking away and invited me to come get ice cream with her and Roxy at the parlor at the start of the pier. I again, of course, accepted happily, because I was a desperate idiot. Once we were in and seated, I started flipping through the menu. What's good in here? I asked without looking up. Ha ha ha. Claire began laughing far too loud. You are so funny. Then she started stroking my arm. I thanked her, totally bemused, and went back to reading without much of a thought as someone brushed past me. Then I heard Roxy say to whoever it was, Hey Anthony, I heard a rumor about you tonight. You know when you get a little piece of information and suddenly everything just falls into place, and you realize how stupid you've been. It's like struggling with a door and you're pulling the handle with everything you've got, and all it does, it shudder while your frustration builds. Then you get a tap on the shoulder and you turn around to see a person gesturing to the sign that says push. Then it all falls into place and you realize what a fucking idiot you are. This is kind of the story of my life. I tried my best to suppress the mental trauma that night caused me, but it really did cause me a lot of problems. Claire ended up back together with Anthony and never once looked my way again. Everyone in my school found out about the way I had been used as a free meal ticket and a prop, and they never let me forget it with constant jibes and jokes. Roxy even confessed to me that Claire never even knew my name, only agreeing to go out with me because I would pay for her night out. I know it wasn't some horrible tragedy that would plague me forever type of event, but for a young man who was just trying to figure himself out, it was pretty tough to take. It probably made me a little more paranoid and a little angrier than I should have been in life. I went through a couple of bouts of depression and anxiety attacks. My mom even made me see a shrink for a few months and he filled me full of pills and bullshit. That was all behind me though now. I came off my meds and moved on with my life years ago. But anyway, back to the reason I'm telling this story. The fortune teller. Now her warning had barely crossed my mind since then, and I had just figured it to be some lame gimmick to con young ones out of their pocket money. Then one night, around 4 years later, I received a call from one of my oldest friends. Hey dude, he began. I could tell he was pretty high. What's happening? Nothing much. Watching Blade Runner with a joint, standard Friday. I laughed. He laughed too. Yeah, man, living the drive, as they say. I'm totally baked too. Trevor gave me some of this weird Polish shit and it's blowing my mind. Then he took a more somber tone. You remember that chick Claire Smith from school? You know, the blonde one with the big... Yeah, what about her? I interrupted. Dude, she's totally dead. Car crash, man. It's a horrible thing to admit, but a tiny part of me was happy when I heard that. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't cheering her death, but I had hated her and hoped something bad would happen to her for the longest time. In all honesty, I thought I would have felt a bit happier, but I knew it was totally wrong to feel this way over someone's death, who by all accounts never deserved it. Her boyfriend was driving, totally wasted apparently. Drove into a tree or some shit, he continued. Hey, was she still going out with that Anthony guy? I asked. The fortune teller's warning still hadn't crossed my mind, and it wouldn't for some time. I was just interested to know. Yeah, he was driving. They'd been together forever, man. Hey, didn't you go... I quickly changed gears before he started. Such a shame, I said solemnly, which was enough to divert his question. Yeah, man, she was totally hot. My emotions were up and down for a while after that. I mainly felt disgusted with myself for having been even the slightest bit happy at her passing. There was still one tiny part of me, though, an angry and juvenile part, that was glad. Time marches on as it does, and soon I had to put my emotions to one side as other problems like getting a job and a house crept into my life as I got older. I would still think of Claire and that shitty night, but not as much as I used to. It wasn't for another 6 years that things started to spiral out of control for me. Again, I received a call from my old friend one night. Hey buddy, how are you? This time I could hear his newborn wailing in the background. He spoke much more proper now that he was all grown up with a wife and kid. How's things? You know, got an interview for that hardware store in town tomorrow, I began, taking a draw and lowering the TV. How's things with you? Busy with the little one, we're not getting much sleep, work's busy too. Then he took that somber tone that I had heard before. Listen, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but do you remember that girl Roxy from high school? Yeah, what about her? Well, she passed away on Friday night there. I don't know if you knew. The cogs in my brain started whirling as I put together the information. What happened? I asked, shaken. I'm not 100% sure. I heard that she was out with her friends and then she had some sort of brain aneurysm. Apparently, she just dropped dead. Jesus. Yeah, it's really a shame, he said, then lowered his voice to a dull whisper so his wife wouldn't hear she was totally hot. After we hung up, I tried to rack my brain for what that fortune teller had told her. I was sure it was something like the last TV show she'd watched or book she'd read. I just couldn't remember. At this time, I was still just under the impression it was some freaky coincidence, but there was a little bit of doubt just gnawing at my paranoid mind. I'd always thought that fate was conspiring against me. The very next day, I saw the words "The Jungle Book" in cinemas now on the side of a bus, and it all began to click into place. Of course, that was what the fortune teller said would be the last film, and I had totally forgotten that they had remade it too. The doubt began to grow and grow. I attended Roxy's funeral shortly after that. The ceremony wasn't far from where I lived, and I found the details on Facebook. The church was filled with people I recognized from school but never quite memorized their names. I scoured the pews for someone whose name I remembered and finally found one. His name was Gareth. I was pretty sure he was in my year, maybe the year above. I slid into the pew and sat beside him. He turned and gave me a knowing smile. He probably recognized my face but never quite memorized my name. Terrible tragedy, I whispered solemnly. Horrible, he whispered back. Do you know what happened to her? I mean, I heard it was a brain aneurysm. Yeah, it happened in that big cinema in the city center. Apparently she just, dropped dead. My heart began racing a little. Shit, that's terrible, I began. I knew what I had to ask, but I didn't want to come across as strange. Was it before she went into the movie, or after? Gareth shot me a look of confusion. I don't fucking know, man. Yeah, of course, I said, trying to back out a little. He said, she was my sister's friend, never really knew her. He said, pointing to a girl nearer the front who was in fits of tears. Oh man, I'm sorry, must be really tough. Yeah, she's a wreck. Hey, I began again. Do you know if they were seeing the new Jungle Book? Dude, he said, now with a look of disgust on his face. What the fuck is wrong with you? Gareth never spoke to me much after that. I even heard him refer to me as a weirdo to the person on the other side of him. I suppressed the urge to hit him at that point. I really didn't like being called that. A terrifying picture was starting to emerge, though, and that seemed much more important. There was an image of Roxy on the altar, wrapped in flowers, that I was pretty focused on. She looked pretty much the same as I had remembered her. She was an attractive girl, but I had tarred her with the same brush as Claire, never really liking her much after that night. She was kind of a bitch to me, but she never deserved this. I think I had something of a mini panic attack as I looked at that picture of her smiling. I imagined my face there, and I imagined how many people would come to mourn me. Nowhere near as many. After the ceremony, the mourners went to a local pub, which had been rented out for the occasion. I did feel like a bit of a fraud there, though. Everyone was clearly upset, whereas I was just looking to speak to Gareth's sister. I eventually found her sat in a corner, mascara streaming down her cheeks as she held a bottle of beer and stared into space. "Hey," I spoke cautiously, standing a few feet in front. "Hey," she replied, smiling sweetly behind the tears, but not really looking up. I decided to just go for the Hail Mary. "She loved the Jungle Book, didn't she?" The girl looked up surprised, wiping her tears. "Yeah. How did you know?" "I used to know her in high school. She was a nice girl. This is all so horrible. I can't believe she's gone. Were you with her? You know, in the end," I interrupted. The girl nodded. She loved that film. She laughed faintly. At least she got to see it before. She then burst into floods of tears, and truth be told, I nearly did too. All the dots were beginning to align, and that fortune teller's reading was all unfolding before my eyes. Providence backwards. Fortune. Providence backwards. Fortune. That was what she had told me. I repeated this continually to myself after I left that pub. As soon as I was home, I Googled the band name, but found very little save for Facebook and SoundCloud pages. They had a few songs, but it seemed like they were just an unsigned band with no real releases to speak of. Their bio said they were a two-piece rock band, hailing from Liverpool. The lead singer was a woman in her 20s, blonde messy hair with streaks of color through it. I clicked on her picture and read how she was Debbie, the band's songwriter and vocalist, while the other one was Kyle, a guy around the same age who claimed to be the drummer, keyboard player. They seemed to have a pretty small but solid fan base of a few hundred and played gigs around the country in bars and clubs. I scoured their page to see if I could see a song called Fortune, but I was relieved to see there wasn't. Was this the band? A band I had never heard of and were, for all intents and purposes, nobodies. I kept on telling myself that I was just being crazy, telling myself that this was all just some big coincidence, that the fortune teller had probably just stuck two words together and they happened to be a band's name. The doubt had grown too much by this point. It was inoperable. I listened to a couple of tracks on their SoundCloud, just so I would recognize the singer's voice. That way, if I ever heard them on the radio or something, I could turn it off. It seemed crazy, but all I had to do was avoid listening to a band that no one else was listening to either. To my disappointment, the tracks that I did listen to were pretty good, probably good enough to get them a record deal. But I didn't know a lot about music. I tried to find the fortune teller the next day, but of course she was long gone. No one seemed to even remember her, which I found odd. The fair hadn't been to the pier for years, and it had kind of gone to shit. There was no way I was tracking her down. I would just have to deal with this myself. It was between me and that band now. A weird thing happened, though. Instead of trying to avoid them, I became, well, kind of obsessed with them. I would check their page 5-6 times a day, just to make sure they hadn't put a song called Fortune up. I know it seems a bit crazy, but if you were in my position, and you knew the last song you'd ever hear before you died, wouldn't you want to know when it's coming? The band put up a song on their Facebook in early September, and it gained a bit of recognition online. I gave it a few listens and was quite impressed, albeit terrified that their popularity was rising. I would track the listen counter religiously. Every day it seemed to double or triple until it was in the tens of thousands. The thing may as well have been an anxiety level monitor for me. It was at this point I decided that I had to be more proactive and that I couldn't just sit around and wait for the inevitable. I began messaging the band directly on their Facebook, at first just saying that I was a fan and asking about their upcoming music. Kyle was the one who initially messaged me, and I asked him if they planned to make an album anytime soon. He said that a few labels had approached them. I feigned excitement and asked them if they had ever written a song called Fortune. He told me that they hadn't and seemed a bit confused with the question while I was temporarily relived. A few weeks later, they announced that they had signed to a local record label and we're going to be working on an album in the near future. This, of course, scared the shit out of me. I felt like I had been watching a tiny bit of snow roll down a hill, gradually morphing into this great big fucking behemoth that was headed straight for me. I began messaging them daily, asking for constant updates on the album and if they had a track listing yet. In fairness to them, they did reply to me at first, and my constant asking them not to write a song called Fortune became kind of an in-joke between us. Well, at least I thought. Debbie was the one who messaged me back the most often. She was really sweet in her replies, and I kind of felt like we had a bit of connection. In other circumstances, I'd have said she's the perfect girl for me. After a few months, though, they stopped replying to me, even blocked me from their Facebook. I was kind of pissed off, but I just made up another account and began my following through that. I still hadn't found a job, by the way. The band had kind of taken up most of my time, and when I wasn't scouring the internet for updates, I'd be smoking enough weed to make a rapper blush. The few friends I had quickly fell away. They didn't understand why I was obsessed with this band. When I explained, they never believed me, though. They said I was attention-seeking, and that there was no way a fortune teller told the girls those things. I didn't need them anyway. I had the band to worry about. The album dropped in February of the following year, and to my relief, no mention of a track called Fortune. It was only temporary relief, though, as the album received pretty good reviews from the critics, and I knew this band had a future. I tried messaging them, pretending to congratulate them and subtly asking about future releases. I don't know if I've got a familiar style of writing, but they'd always know it was me somehow. Bastards, you're probably reading this and thinking I'm a complete loser. I mean, I know I am. But from my perspective, you can imagine how mentally taxing all this is. A song was going to be released in the near future that would be the last one I ever heard. So realistically, I was looking at my untimely death, barring the slim chance of it being some timeless classic like Bohemian Rhapsody. I became more and more frustrated with life and the band. My emotions were all over the place. I didn't really sleep much during these months, and I was too scared to leave my house. I only ever done so for food supplies, really. Not that I was eating that much anyway. I had spent so much time and attention on them that I thought I might actually be in love with Debbie. I mean, she was really attractive, and I did like the music she was making. When we chatted at first, I got the feeling that she really did like me. I often daydreamed about meeting her and convincing her to let me join the band. I could play a little guitar and thought I could influence the songs we wrote together, make a big fuss if the word fortune ever came up. Maybe I was delusional. I hated the band in equal measure, though, and they stopped replying to any of my accounts altogether. The last message I received was one from Debbie saying if I didn't stop messaging them, then she would write the song just to spite me. I was shocked she would be so cold. I thought she was different. Soon after that, I got a strongly worded email from their manager telling me to stop contacting them or he'd phone the police. They just wouldn't listen to me. All I wanted was a chance to explain. They played a gig in London in the summer that year, an old cinema that had been converted into a decent little music venue. It was pretty close to my house, so I decided to go along, just to try and talk to Debbie. I felt like she would understand, like we had a bit of a connection. Anyway, I waited outside the closed doors of the band entrance for around 5 hours before the gig. I was the first one there, but as the day went, fans started gathering. By the time they arrived, I had been shuffled into the middle of a screaming crowd, and I had to fight my way to the front. I finally got there and was within touching distance of her when she saw me. Then her face dropped like she recognized me as that crazy dude. She pointed to one of the security guards, then at me, and within seconds I was being dragged away. "Debbie, please. I just want to talk," I screamed as I was being manhandled across the road. "Don't you dare write that song, you bitch." I know that seemed a bit rash, but I was just trying to make her listen. Providence Backwards soon were on the radio and television, their fan base and their reach growing every day. I tried to back off them as far as messaging was concerned, but I was still keeping up to date with every interview and press release that came out of their camp. That's the reason I managed to catch the late-night interview they did on a local radio station. It went like this. "So, first album was a success, guys," the DJ crooned. "Yeah, we were pretty excited with the feedback. It was amazing," Debbie and Kyle said nearly in unison. "So what's next for you guys?" "Well, we've got the title for our new album, but we've not written it yet." Debbie laughed. I knew what was coming. "Yeah, it's going to be called Fortune." My heart sank. This was it. The beginning of the end for me. "Oh, so you've got a title and you're working around that. That's cool. The DJ laughed. Why's that? I know this will sound odd, but there's this weird fucking... Wait, can I swear? She laughed. Yeah, it's cool. After the watershed. Yeah, so there's this creepy stalker guy that been harassing us since, before we were even signed. I mean, we'd already been a band for a while. Then one day he starts messaging us, telling us not to write a song called Fortune. Yeah, at first it was just weird, dude, are you high or some shit? Kyle laughed. But then he started getting really aggressive and turning up at our gigs, screaming at me, demanding I never write that song. Jesus. The DJ whispered into the mic, a bit concerned sounding. So yeah, me and Kyle were just like, fuck this motherfucker. They both laughed. We're writing this song, you can't intimidate me. They all started laughing, then the DJ congratulated her for sticking it to me. Truth be told, I think I laughed a little too. It was just so horribly twisted that I had become the architect of my own doom. If I had just acted like a sane person, then none of this would have happened. Instead, I'd been the influence for the song that would signal the end for me, and now that end was in sight. I never slept much at all after I heard that interview. I spent most nights going over it in my head. Sometimes I would tell myself that this song being released doesn't necessarily mean I'll die anytime soon. But then again, how many moderately successful rock groups will have their songs played for years after its release? I mean, I sure as shit wasn't going to hear this song in 40 years. It would be sooner rather than later that I met my end. It had to be. I was terrified. The thought of hearing that song then meeting the same fate as Roxy. The thought of my face on the altar beside my coffin and nobody there to mourn me was so much worse. I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't be as big a loser in death as I was in life. The band's next gig was in Glasgow, and I borrowed my mom's car and drove all the way up. It was their last scheduled gig for a while, so this was my last chance before they would start writing the song. All I wanted was for her to listen to me and hopefully understand what was happening. I waited outside the venue all day, sitting in my car as the cold winter frost ate its way up the windows. After it had finished, a group of fans gathered at the back door of the venue, waiting for autographs and pictures. I just stayed in my car and watched as Debbie and Kyle appeared for a few selfies, then clambered into a fancy car with tinted windows and sped off. I had seen enough cop shows to know that you have to keep your distance when tailing someone, and I think I done pretty well. I kept at least 4 car lengths behind them, all the way to their hotel. The pair were dropped at the front door, and their car pulled away to the parking spaces as I watched from across the road. Kyle made a drink gesture and Debbie nodded. The bar. It was around 10 p.m. when I slinked in and sat in the corner. The bar was pretty busy, so I was fairly confident I would go unnoticed. All I had to do was wait for a moment when she was alone. Then I could finally speak to her, face to face. As I sat and watched, more and more people began recognizing them as Providence backwards, and a constant stream of fans kept approaching for pictures. Of course, being the lovely person that she was, Debbie smiled away and gave some of them hugs. I longed to be embraced by her like that. Her blonde, messy hair brushes against my cheek. I noticed something that the others didn't, though. It was when she thought no one was looking that she'd rub her eyes and yawn. She was clearly tired, but no one seemed to care. I remember thinking to myself that if she let me into her life, I would always notice these little things. I wasn't like the others. I really knew her. It was around midnight when she whispered something to Kyle and bid all the fans that clamored around her a good night. She then went behind the bar and into the fire escape stairwell, trying to avoid meeting those crazed fans, I assumed. I knew this was my chance, though, and I quickly got to my feet and rushed up the main staircase in the lobby until I reached the second floor. Then, as quick as my legs would take me, I rushed to the stairwell where I could intercept her just as she reached my level. I burst through the door, pretty out of breath, and met her as she was 1 or 2 steps short of the landing where I stood in that cold metallic well. "Debbie, I began panting. Her eyes grew wide with fear when she recognized my face. "Stay back from me, I'm serious," she barked. "No, just listen, you've got it all wrong." Sweat was creeping into my eyes at this point, blurring my vision. "Can't you just leave me alone? Don't write that song, please, my life depends on it. Listen, man, you've got some serious issues, okay? You can't tell me what I can or cannot write, you got that?" She tried to push past me, but I grabbed her arm. "Debbie, I love you. The only way we can be together is if you don't write that song. I know it sounds crazy, but you have to trust me. You're fucking delusional. I don't even know you." She began squirming. "Let go of me." "Why won't you just listen to me?" I screamed. "Let go of me, you fucking weirdo." The pent-up frustration inside me exploded, and then it became clear what I had to do. It was the one thing I'd been dreading, but the doubt had been festering since I first saw the band's name on Facebook. I grabbed her biceps with both of my hands and gave her a forceful push back down from where she had come. She was almost horizontal by the time she hit the first step, her head cracking against the steel durbar. Then a roll and another horrible crack, and another until she was lying at the bottom of the stairs. Her body lay flat, but her neck and head rested against the far wall at a horrendous angle. She was dead. I don't really recall much after that. I must have acted on sheer instinct because the next thing I knew I was flying down the motorway. Then I was home. Then I sat in my bed rocking back and forth most of the next day. My emotions were once again all over the place. On the one hand, I had just murdered a woman that I thought I loved. On the other, I had lifted the curse and I would never hear a song by Providence backwards called Fortune. The latter feeling of relief kind of took over after the police ruled her death as accidental a few days later. She had quite a lot of alcohol and drink in her system. She simply slipped, they said. I know I should be ashamed to say it, but that night I slept properly for the first time in months, knowing I was safe. I had been through hell pretty much since Roxy had died. I finally looked in the mirror and saw what I was. I mean, really saw what had become of me. I was this thin, almost gaunt-looking creature. My skin was a sickly white-gray color and my eyes were encompassed by black circles. This life had totally consumed me, but I was finally free of my curse. Yet the guilt of my actions still hung heavy over me, and I was reminded every time I saw her face on the news. The bright talent I had extinguished. I actually felt so bad that I decided to attend her funeral up in Liverpool. Well, I say attend, but I kind of lingered outside the crematorium. There were so many people there, it was unbelievable, really. Hundreds of mourners, all draped in black tones, watched on as her coffin was taken in, cold winter rain bouncing off of it. There was a large framed picture of her smiling face, like the one I had seen at Roxy's funeral, and a part of me thanked God it wasn't my face. So many people were gathered because of what I had done, and it made me feel like the smallest person on this planet. This was coupled with the crushing realization that, if it had been me in that coffin, I could probably count with my fingers the amount of people that would be here. I think that was the worst feeling, actually. After it was all over, I followed a large group as they made their way to a local golf club, which they had probably rented out for the occasion. Again, though, I never actually went inside in case Kyle or their manager spotted me. I just kind of lingered some more, smoking cigarettes and pacing back and forth. I think I might have been crying, but I couldn't really tell. Then something caught my eye. In the tree line, about 100 yards from the clubhouse, stood a figure that I felt as though I recognized. I strained my eyes and made out a face that I was sure I had seen before. The fortune teller. Older looking now, of course, but definitely her. And there she was, standing staring into space and smoking a cigarette. It never made any sense to me at that time, and all the scenarios rushed through my head. Had I messed some cosmic rhythm up by manifesting my destiny? How did she know? I cautiously approached, but she never looked up, just kept staring off into the distance. Are you here for the funeral? I asked timidly. Why the fuck else would I be here? She spoke with a thick Liverpudlian accent which was jarring. She then turned her head to me and scrunched her face, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Don't I know you? She asked. I was so confused at this point, nothing made sense. Aren't you a fortune teller? Her face relaxed and the faintest smile crept over her lips. Yeah, I used to do that down in London on the weekends. Jesus, that's a long time ago now. Did I tell your fortune? She laughed softly. I couldn't speak. My head was spinning. Was this really her? How did you know my sister? She asked. I looked at her blankly. She turned away and took another draw as her eyes started to well up again. She used to help me with my routine on the pier. Mystic Ann, I used to call myself. I was such a goof. But, you? I stammered, sweat now dripping down my forehead as I worked to keep it out of my eyes, blurring my vision. Wait, you didn't think I was a real psychic, did you? She scoffed. It was such a stupid routine, I think most people saw through it. All we did was ask the person their name, and then Debbie, who was sitting behind the curtain, would look them up on MySpace or whatever, and just whisper me shit. Pieces began to align. Then if it landed on movie or something, I'd just say a movie that they listed as being one of their favorites. It was so stupid, some people fell for it, she said, shaking her head. Last person you'll make love to, I whispered. Is this what I told your fortune on? She asked jokingly. We just looked to see if it said you were in a relationship with someone and just say their first name. You didn't seriously buy it, did you? No, I started. You told me Providence backwards. I hope she didn't notice my voice trembling. Oh yeah, haha. I remember Debbie would make me say that every time it landed on band or song. That's what she called her little band she had at the time. She loved that name for some reason. She wanted me to try spread the word, so I'd tell anyone who landed on them and hoped they'd check out her band's MySpace. She began to trail off reflectively. She always said that was going to be her band's name. You know when you get a little piece of information and suddenly everything just falls into place, and you realize how stupid you've been. That brings me to where I am now, sitting writing this note so that you will understand why I did those things. Do you want to know the real kicker, though? As I turned out, the band had already wrote and recorded one track from their new album, Fortune. And to be honest, it was kind of shit, and I think everyone knew it. And do you know what happens when a musician dies? Their sales fucking explode. That song is everywhere at the moment. Going to be #1, they say. After speaking to Debbie's sister, I apparently burst into hysterical fits of laughter, but I can't really recall it. Anyway, this freaked her out so much that she went back into the clubhouse and told Kyle about the skinny creep outside. He had never believed Debbie had accidentally fallen down those stairs, I later found out. He put 2 and 2 together, went to the police, and then they started looking at the case from a different point of view. That's when they really looked the CCTV footage from the hotel. Me walking in, sitting at the bar, staring at her for 2 hours, leaving just as she left and then hurrying out soon after. I had to attend an interview down the police station there. I've not been charged, but they advised me to get a lawyer as soon as possible. I see the funny side of all this now, though. I'm going to finish writing this letter, and then I'm going to take every pill in my mom's medicine cabinet. The song Fortune by Providence backwards will be on loop. It's really started to grow on me. So this is my confession, my story. If you're reading this, then you're either a member of my family or someone I consider a friend, and I really need you to do me one last favor. I'd like a big frame picture of my face, smiling by my coffin, but most of all, I really hope you'll be able to make it to my funeral. Shit. I glanced at my watch, 12:52. Fuck, I hadn't planned on staying out so late. Normally, being out until the small hours of the morning on a weekend wouldn't bother me. Unfortunately, this wasn't your everyday situation. Since arriving in Beijing, all of us foreigners have been ridiculously busy with class. Getting adjusted to intensive-level Chinese isn't easy, and we had all been shut in our rooms, studying furiously to keep up. But now it was the weekend and all bets were off. All the other American students had wanted to go to Sanlitun to drink and dance. For those unfamiliar with the Beijing area, Sanlitun is Beijing's party palace. Clubs, bars, and anything else young adults could get into on a Saturday night cluster here, with their blinking neon lights and rave music. Here was perhaps the highest concentration of foreigners in all of China, and it was somewhat comforting to be among a crowd of your own, no longer whispered about and pointed at by the rampant Beijingers. What a change, to go from this anonymous, seedy environment to the cold, harsh glare of the subway. The subway. That was the problem I was facing as I rushed down the streets of Sanlitun, practically bolting towards the Tuanjihu subway station. Instead of opting to live in the foreign student dorms like most of my classmates, I just had to challenge myself by living with a host family. Not that I don't like them, don't get me wrong. They're lovely, and living with them has definitely improved my Chinese. The only problem is that they live in Changping, an hour and a half away from Pekingyu, Sanlitun, Wudao, and all the other places that actually matter to a college student like myself. Normally, I didn't mind the commute. It allowed me a little time to study or listen to music on my way to school, providing I didn't arrive at the hell that is rush hour. But at night, it was much more problematic. Let's put it in financial terms. The subway ride from my house to Pekingyu, or Sanlitun for that matter, is about 5 kwai. Not so bad, right? But my host family had informed me that the subway closes at 11 p.m. Seriously? So, if I wanted to get home, I'd have to hop into a cab, which would definitely be at least 100 kwai. That's maybe around $40 in American money, which isn't so bad for a cab ride that promised to be 45 minutes at best. but I still wasn't willing to fork out money like that every weekend when I wanted to go out. It adds up, you know? I know what you're thinking. If the subway closes at 11 p.m., why was I rushing for it at 1 in the morning? I should mention that I am in high-level Chinese, but my Chinese is still far from fluent. I was sure that my host family had said 11 p.m., but what if they were wrong? If there was even the slightest chance the subway was still open, I'd go and take it. If not, hopefully I would be in a good spot to catch a cab. As I approached the subway station, I saw promising fluorescent lights glowing from its depths. Oh, thank God, I thought to myself. No more worrying about being ripped off, dropped off at the wrong place, or murdered. I've always been a bit paranoid. I bounded down the stairs, my footsteps echoing and bouncing off the tiled walls. It was pretty empty, but that's what I'd expect so late at night. I walked brusquely to the security check, my spirits lifting immensely. I couldn't wait to get home and shower. I looked at the guards and stopped in my tracks. A serious-looking Chinese man stared back at me. Rather than the black military-esque uniform that I was accustomed to seeing, he was attired in a long cloak with a high collar, very classical Chinese. A strange red and black hat adorned his thick braided hair. The most troubling aspect of his dress, however, was a thick yellowing scroll of paper that seemed pasted onto his chest with thick black Chinese characters scrawled down the front. I tried half-heartedly to read the characters, but they swirled across my line of vision in a confusion of strokes that led me to believe that they must be ancient Chinese. His piercing eyes ripped through me, freezing my heart into a dead stop. Hi? He continued to stare at me with no answer. I tried again in Chinese this time. Hey, is the subway open? When does it close? He stared at me again, his lips set in a straight line. Wow, so helpful. I was beginning to get extremely uncomfortable. Should I leave? I was about to turn around and hightail it out of there when his lips parted slightly. His eyes remained fixed and rigid while his mouth squirmed against his pale skin like a twisting worm. But wait though I did, no sound issued forth. Once he had finished speaking, he looked at me expectantly. If I had been in America, I would have taken him for a lunatic and turned tail. But the thing is, I was in Beijing. Maybe this was just a part of the culture I didn't understand. Maybe something weird was happening and I didn't quite get it. Maybe it was only weird to me, but not to your average Beijinger. So stupid as I was, I didn't let it end there. Maintaining strong eye contact, I pointed to myself, then pointed to the stairs that led into the subway. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, and I passed through without further issue. Next came the turnstiles. I tried to swipe my handy-dandy subway card, but nothing registered. They were open anyway, and the guard wasn't paying me any attention, so I stepped through with a shrug. Well, whatever. Free ride for me. As I descended into the fluorescent tunnel, I began berating myself for making this journey. Why didn't I just stay in the dorm with my friends? Well, actually, the answer to that question was pretty simple. Who wanted to sleep on a rock-hard bed with a bunch of drunks? No, thanks. I'll take my chances with creepy subway guard. To my surprise, a plethora of people awaited me when I arrived at my platform. At least I think it was my platform. It was situated where my platform was supposed to be, but the signs had changed. Instead of the chic plastic that slicked the walls in the morning, there were heavy wood signs with carved squiggles that I couldn't decipher. I began to grow colder as I wondered what the hell I had gotten myself into. However, I managed to stay calm due to the crowd. If there were this many people waiting for the train, then it had to arrive and go somewhere, right? I needed to remain calm, just think of this as an adventure. Like I'm Bilbo Baggins or something. It took me a moment to realize that something else was wrong. Everyone was silent. Usually the subway was a cacophony of laughter, idle chatter, and angry voices pushing their way through the crowds. On this occasion, however, the silence was so palpable I could taste it, like sawdust on my tongue. And when I looked around, their mouths were all moving. Just as the guard before, their lips blossomed and closed like dragon snaps, but no sound came forth. I'll admit it. I was just about to walk back up those stairs and leave when the subway pulled up to the platform. All of a sudden, the still passengers burst to life and filled the thus far empty train. I was swept along with them, practically carried into the train car by a mob of businessmen, old women, and children. Wait, children? I looked down and saw a 6-year-old girl at my feet, her eyes solemn and her hair pulled back into pigtails. She appeared to be accompanied by no one, and none of the other passengers paid attention to her. I knelt down to her eye level. Hey there, do you know where your mommy and daddy are? I should have kept my mouth shut. Curse my American meddling. Without blinking, her eyes as cold and blank as chalk, her mouth shuddered and twisted. No sound. Fuck, fuck, fuck. Suddenly I was approached by another passenger. By this point, all eyes were on me. I was used to being stared at because my porcelain skin so clearly marks me as a foreigner, but this was somehow different. The stares were intense rather than curious. For the first time, I really felt like I didn't belong. The passenger who approached me was a man perhaps in his late 50s, with graying hair and a scraggly mustache to match. He kept his mouth pressed in a firm line as he handed me a block of chocolate. What? He placed it in my hand, stared right at my gaping jaw, and waited patiently. The other passengers continued staring. The stares got more intense, if that's even possible. But the mouths, they continued their hell dance uninterrupted. I shuddered. I don't know why I did what I did next. It was stupid and horrible, and it probably saved my life. I bit into the brick of chocolate. Immediately an awful taste filled my mouth and I began to choke, spitting the mush out onto the ground without hesitation. One thought surfaced through the murky confusion in my mind. Mud. What the fuck is this? Is this some kind of a joke? And then, all of a sudden, a roar of noise filled the air. I could hear hundreds of conversations issuing from those grimy lips, accompanied by appropriate laughter, snorts, scoffs, and coughs. All eyes were still on me, but for all intents and purposes it sounded like a regular Beijing subway. The shock must have registered on my face because the man who had approached me laughed. I think you're lost. I stared at him. And no, I'm going to Heighten Huangzhuang Station. A chorus of laughter rang out around him. Do you know where this train goes? Now I was getting frustrated. Heighten Huangzhuang, I ride it every morning. He nodded sagely. Yes, and I'm sure in the morning it does go to Heighten. But at night it serves a different purpose. I struggled to keep up with his muddled Beijing accent. What was he saying? Listen carefully. Obediently, I tuned into the conversation next to me. It was between a young man, no more than 20 years old, and a middle-aged woman wearing a red scarf. What happened to you? Asked the man. Car accident, you? He blushed. Suicide. She hit his shoulder with a scoff of disgust. You should have valued your life more. Now what will happen when you are judged, The man looked agitated and preoccupied with his thoughts. In the meantime, I had turned ashen. I looked back at the man. Where does this train go? Where? I think you already know. I began to panic as the train ground to a halt. And this is your stop. My panic grew. No, I don't want to go. He smiled at me kindly. Trust me, you'll be fine. As the doors slid open, he shoved me out. I found myself alone, standing in the bright fluorescent lights of a subway platform identical to the Tuanjihu station. For one moment only, I looked around, waiting breathlessly for a sign of life. Then I bolted up the stairs. As I ran past the security guard, I heard his laughter call after me. It bounced sickeningly off the walls and wormed its way into my skull. I shrieked and bolted out of the station, desperate to escape that sound. Suddenly, I was standing on Sanlitun again, as though I had never left. The street was congested with people who seemed completely indifferent to the fact that I had almost been sent to the underworld. They chattered by while I whirled back around. The subway was dark, deserted, and locked. I trembled quietly as I stared into that abyss. Now I knew what the inside of that darkness looked like. A young Chinese couple approached me. The man stuttered out in broken English. Are you okay? You look sick. I stared at him, thinking vaguely of the young suicide victim on his way to judgment. I want to go home, I muttered in Chinese, casting a sidelong glance back at the subway. As they hailed a taxi for me and spoke to each other in hushed voices, I stared up at the sky, the brick of mud still clutched tightly in my hand. The worst job I ever had in my life was the evening shift at this nasty fucking hobby shop. Let's call it Karen's hobby. I hated everything about it. The customers were idiots, my coworkers were all super bitchy, and my boss Karen was the perviest, meanest old lady you've ever had the displeasure to engage in a conversation about her 3 purebred chihuahuas. So I'm at Karen's hobby, wearing this dumb beige apron and man clogs, and I've got some shitty rainbow sequin earrings and that go for $12.99 in the store. But I get them for free. They're not technically part of my uniform, but I want my girls to model my gear, Karen told me on my first day. Karen was a real bulldog of a woman who wore enough makeup that if she walked into a glass pane, she'd leave a perfect impression of her own form there in fine dust, like a bird leaves when it hits a window. She had big fake eyelashes, big fake platinum blonde hair, long fake pink nails, horrifyingly rock-solid fake breasts, don't ask me how I learned that, and a deep bronze fake tan. It's getting to be 8 o'clock, which is closing time. We've still got about 15 minutes on the clock, but I haven't seen a customer come in the door for the past hour, and I'm sweeping up the floor in the hopes that if we get everything done, Karen might let us go home early. It's the summer of my freshman year in college. I'm working 2 jobs to make up for the hole in my scholarship. TT adds up to about 12 hours a day, and I'm shit tired. I just want to go home and murder some Thalmor emissaries on Skyrim. I'm the only one on the retail floor, unless you count the 57 mannequins and busts we have in the store. We sell full wigs, costume, fashion prosthetics, and fabric for clothes, so there are a bunch of creepy plastic heads sitting on shelves all along the back of the store, all decked out in full makeup and synthetic fiber wigs. Yes, I named all of them, and yes, they creeped the absolute hell out of me. There's a loud creak, and the door to Karen's office swings open. "Kate, in my office," Karen calls in her chain smoker voice. I lean the broom against the bleach blonde mannequin I've named Zenobia. Karen's office makes me uncomfortable for a couple of reasons. First, there's usually between 1 and 3 chihuahuas in there with nasty tooth decay. They jump up all over you, and for the next couple days you smell like dog gingivitis. Second, and more direly, Karen keeps this massive dildo collection in there. And I mean, it's a fucking massive dildo collection in every sense. Yeah. So I sort of sidestep awkwardly into this dildo room, and my coworker Brittany is already in there, her little pink mouth pressed in a hard line. She doesn't look at me. I have a bad feeling about this. Karen closes the door. "It looks like you made a mistake, Katie Bear," Karen says. What? I stammer. Brittany sighs and doesn't say anything. Typical. "The shipment," Karen says, spreading her palms wide like it's obvious. She stared me down and waited for me to answer. "What kind of mistake?" I ask. How about not sorting or logging 4 whole boxes of wigs and prosthetics? Do you remember that now?" "Yeah, that was Brittany's job," I say. "I did 12 boxes, which is 4 boxes more than I was supposed to. I left the last 4 for Brittany, but she never came back from her coffee break." "Is she right, Brittany?" Karen asks. "I had to go home. I felt sick," Brittany says shrilly. "Brittany, just go into the stock room and log the freaking boxes," I say. I'm not normally rude like this, but I'm so goddamn run down and tired. "Why don't you do it? I have to be home by 10. I have actual obligations," Brittany says. "It doesn't take 2 hours to sort 4 boxes, Jesus Christ." Karen holds up a pink-nailed hand. "Both of you girls are gonna stay here until the job is done. I don't care whose fault it is, just get it done." I hated Karen, I really did. I still do, honestly. But I still feel awful about what happened to her. I feel fucking sick. The first weird thing I noticed was the smell. You know that weird plasticky chemical smell that the dentist's office always has? Like latex and tooth dust? It's sweet and sterile and rubbery, and it makes you gag a little. It makes me gag anyways. That was this smell, only way strong. The second weird thing was the sloshing sound the first box made when we picked it up. Like it was full of gelatin. "What if there's a dead body in here?" I ask Brittany as we lift it up and tear off the tape. Why? Brittany grimaces. "Just what if? People find dead bodies in weird places all the time, according to SVU. We could be those guys at the beginning of the show who are like, 'Oh my God, there's a dead body.' That's my big life dream." Brittany never thought I was funny. The moment the box is open, Brittany and I both let out disgusted shrieks. The whole thing is just full of white goop. It's thick and curdled like cheese, and there's a bluish crust along the edges. The dentist smell is suddenly 10 times worse. "What the fuck?" Brittany says. Edges of plastic wrap stick out of the sides, and a few empty plastic bags have floated to the top of the glop. Gross. This must be a bad batch or something. Like maybe they forgot to add a chemical or something. It smells like shit. We have to get this shit out of here. Are the other boxes the same? I wonder. I fucking hope not. Karen will kill us. We should open them and find out. Brittany closes the box back up. I'm dumping this shit outside. This fucking smell has to die. I give her a look. Okay, but don't take too long because we're doing this together. Jesus Christ, fine, chill, Kate. I roll my eyes and don't chill. Once Brittany is gone, I open the other 3 boxes. 2 of them have assorted costume prosthetics. Wigs, fake ears, noses, arm gloves, and masks, the whole shebang. But when I get to the last box, I notice that it's leaking the same white substance out the bottom. The stuff has run into the drain in the floor, left over from when the building was an auto shop. When I open the box, most of the goop has already drained out. At the bottom, there's these weird, half-melted little body parts. I can make out a tiny little arm, like a doll's arm, and flaps of fake skin that look like they could be part of a mask. Chunks of loose black hair are clumped at the bottom, like the stuff you find clogging your shower drain. I mop up the mess myself. At this point, Brittany's been gone for a solid 5 minutes, which is way longer than it takes to take something out to the dump, which means she's gotten distracted and is probably texting her douche boyfriend. Turns out I was right about this. I'm super pissed by the time she finally gets back after like 20 minutes. I've already sorted and logged a whole box by myself. What the hell, Brittany? I ask. Geez, sorry, what's the problem? She slips her phone into her back pocket. I was only gone so long because I went to the bathroom and I found one of Karen's fucking dildos floating in the toilet. Whoa, seriously? It was just floating there. It was one of those creepy, realistic ones, like with veins and everything. No, stop, I don't want to think about it. What did you do? I put it back, stuck it on her desk. Really? You picked it up? Not with my fucking hands, I'm not a masochist. Jesus. Brittany and I finished sorting and logging the other box. It takes about twice as long as it did when it was just me. Do you think she uses them? I wonder. Brittany makes a face. Probably. Old bitch is hornier than a baboon, uglier too. So it's not like she's getting any action. It was in the bathroom too. She was probably in there earlier. Don't talk about it. Once we're finished logging the contents of the box, I hang the clipboard on its hook. The whole room still smells disgusting. Karen can't blame us for the 2 defective boxes because she's the one ordering this shit from whatever cheap plastic overseas slave labor corporate conglomerate it comes from. I wonder if some of this stuff is even legally safe in the United States. I mean, people came into the store complaining about getting rashes or hives or whatever from some cheap plastic shit they bought pretty frequently. We had a strict no refunds policy. Karen liked to explain that to customers in the most condescending tone possible. The chemicals and fibers in the item are clearly listed on the tag. It's not my fault you don't know how to read, she'd say, pursing her Botox lips. I often wondered how much of that woman was still flesh and blood. So much of her was synthetic industrial crap. I wondered how many more injections and implants before she squeaked when she walked. Maybe she had so many dildos because she liked plastic men better than real ones. They were more her kind. Anyways, that night, Brittany is leaning against one of the stockroom shelves texting her boyfriend, and we've got this disgusting gooey box we can't recycle. You can do that one, right? I did the last one, Brittany says. Sure, I say, but I'm not happy about it. The dump out back is super creepy at night, and I'm already a little wigged out, thinking about dead bodies and mysterious boxes. Watch out for mosquitoes. I almost got eaten alive out there. I pick up the gross box, but something is wrong. Hey, Brittany? There used to be hair in here, I say. What? There used to be hair in here. Clumps of it, long and black, covered in goo. And now there's not? Yeah. Well, I didn't fucking touch it. I didn't either. I guess it must have just fucking walked off on its own then. Or maybe that sick shit dissolved it. I stop. Do you think this stuff is dangerous? Probably. Who knows where it came from or what it's made of? Maybe we shouldn't just toss it. Maybe we should call someone. Oh my God, who fucking cares? I just want to get out of here. Don't you have a video game that misses you or a dork forum to troll? Yeah, I say and sigh. I carry the sloshing box down the staircase and out the door to the dumpster bin. A single incandescent bulb flickers and makes an annoying sound on the way down. It's a hot, muggy night out. As I open the door, I prepare for the cloud of mosquitoes to swarm me. It's perfectly peaceful out, not a bug in sight. The smell from the other box is overpowering. I plug my nose and hurry to the dumpster, which is already full of plastic garbage bags. The first box sits on top of it, seeping white glop onto the pile. I'm scared and I don't know why. Something is very off here. I can't hear any cicadas or crickets or birds. There were mosquitoes, but now there aren't. I know it must be the stuff in the box keeping them away. What if this stuff is like really, really bad? Like, what if I'm going to get sick because I handled it and breathed it? My thoughts are interrupted when I hear something rustle in the trash. Goosebumps course up my arms, I freeze. The thing rustles again. It sounds big, like a rat or a squirrel, way down in there. The sound gets a little louder. It's moving up, trying to surface. I step closer, curiously. If there's something alive down there and it's been exposed to the glop and it's fine, maybe I'll be fine too. I think of the coal miners who used to take canaries down into the caves with them to test for deadly gas. This little critter could be my canary. Scritch, scritch, scritch. The thing burrowed its way up. I could almost hear its little teeth chatter. Come on out, little guy, I whisper. Let's see how you're doing. The thing in the dumpster lets out a low, human-sounding moan. I jump back. Holy fuck. The thing moans. I see something moving underneath the dumpster. It's white and bony and long, and it scuttles like a fucking crab. I watch it crawl out of the shadow into the light. A fucking hand. It's a fucking human hand. I drop the box and hightail it back into the building as fast as I can. Brittany, I call. I want to get out of here as fast as I fucking can. I run into the stock room. Britton, geez, what the hell? Brittany asks. She's laying on her back on the stock table. The blue light from her phone lights up her face. Let's get out of here. Could you give me a ride? Brittany sits up. Oh, now you're being nice to me? You want to be my friend? Because you need something from me? Yes, please, I say. I'll pay you. I reach into my pocket. $11.12. I'm not a fucking taxi, Brittany says, flipping her long blonde hair. Fine, I'll give you a ride. But maybe you should little more pleasant from now on if you want favors from people. I roll my eyes. Brittany stands. I'm going to go to the bathroom again and then we can leave. 5 minutes. Geez, I can't wait to get out of here. This place is fucking creepy as shit at night. You don't know the half of it. I walked to the employee lockers and grabbed my bag. The smell lingers in the stockroom. I go out the doors onto the main floor to wait for Brittany. But when I get out there, I see her standing there already. Brittany, I thought you just went downstairs. Brittany stands in the center of the retail floor with her back to me. She stares straight ahead at the doors. Her long blonde hair spills down her back. The disgusting chemical smell is 10 times stronger all of a sudden. Holy fuck, Brittany says in a weird, drawling voice. What? I thought you just went downstairs. She sounds wrong. Britt. It suddenly dawns on me that Brittany had been wearing skinny jeans before. This girl standing in front of me isn't wearing anything on her legs. And her hair, it's so much longer than Brittany's hair, so much more perfect, like plastic, mannequin hair. Come on out, guy. Holy fuck, I thought you just went. The girl's blonde head turns around to face me, just the head, all the way around. Long, ratty black hair hangs down over the thing's face, tangled and snarled and dripping with that white glop. At its scalp, where the blonde hair meets the black, there's kind of membrane, some fleshy white thing beneath the hair, inching its way up the mannequin's forehead, hugging itself to the plastic. The mannequin's arm shoots out towards me. It cracks, spinning on its hinge. Splotches of goopy white flesh wriggle across it like tapeworms. The thing takes step toward me. The mannequin's body stops at the waist. I see now, what I'd initially mistaken for legs is actually a pair of skinny, white, bony arms. The hands make a slopping sound as they hit the floor. I scream at the top of my lungs and turn around, and run faster than I've ever ran in my life down the stairs. Brittany, I scream. Brittany! The creature mimics. Slop, 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 slop. It staggers along down the stairs on its palms awkwardly, slouching from side to side, dragging its torso behind it. There's a smash and the lights are out. The creature must have hit it with its head. I shriek and stumble forwards in the sudden darkness, and I'm falling. I slam into the floor and hear something crack, and there's a sharp pain in my ankle. Brittany. The horrible thing waddles on its palms, swaying this way and that. Its shadow lumbers at me closer and closer. I try to get up, but I can't. Holy shit, I can't. The door to the bathroom opens and light floods into the stairwell and illuminates the thing's horrible body. Duck, Brittany yells, and I automatically recoil. Brittany tosses a bucket full of sharp-smelling liquid at the mannequin thing. It splashes all over the creature, and I swear to God, steam starts to rise from its white flesh as it starts to erode. Bits of white glop fall to the ground. The hair sizzles and bits of it slump off. Brittany. The whole mannequin starts to fall apart. Its hand legs melt and collapse into glop, and whatever substance was in the bucket bubbles furiously. The mannequin torso sinks to the floor in a pool of white goo and sour chemicals. "Let's get the fuck out of here," Brittany says. She drops the bucket and helps me stand up. The fumes in the stairwell have us both gagging. I'm trying not to breathe it in. My throat and eyes burn. "What? How did you know?" I ask once we're out behind the building. Brittany unlocks her car with the remote key. "When I got to the bathroom, I found a fucking foot trying to wriggle out of the toilet. A foot and part of a leg. It was slithering. I figure that white shit must have leaked into the pipes from the drain, you know? There was Drano in the closet and I have the keys. The little fucker burned right up." "The bucket?" Brittany turned the ignition. "Drano, mop water, and a couple random cleaning agents." My eyes are killing me. Yeah, that fucking happens when you breathe deadly fucking gas. Brittany swerves as fast as she can out of the parking lot the second her car roars to life, and we take off down the highway. I roll down my window to let the fresh air in. Nasty fucking industrial chemicals. Brittany shakes her head. After that night, I didn't come back to work. I called in to tell Karen I was quitting and that the shop wasn't safe. I said I spilled a bunch of cleaning agents on accident and the air was toxic. I tried my best to apologize. Karen wasn't having any of it. Brittany quit too. Didn't tell Karen why, but Karen was going to be a bitch about it one way or another. We haven't really kept in contact. I'm really grateful to her. Even if she annoyed the shit out of me while we were working together, I really do believe she saved my life that night. I had to go to the hospital later because I breathed poison, but I was totally fine after that. It was easy to forget about what happened that night because it was easy to pretend it never happened. I sort of just pushed it to the back of my mind. Sometimes, though, it would resurface as I lay awake at night, not able to sleep because I couldn't shake the feeling, the awful feeling at the pit of my belly, that there was something crucial we forgot. I'm not worried that the creature is still out there because I'm just not. Brittany got it pretty good with the Drano, and she must have gotten all the stuff in the pipes too because I haven't heard of any more trouble happening at Karen's hobby since then. Still, for the past couple months I've been waking up in sweats, with an awful feeling. I passed it off as paranoia until this morning when I got a text from Brittany. The name at the bottom of my contacts list suddenly popped up to the top, and I understood. I realized what we'd forgotten, what we'd left behind. A single missing piece. The text read, "Karen is pregnant." Every state in America has the same legend. Most places call them Crybaby Bridge. You stop somewhere, often it's a covered bridge. You turn off your engine and wait. If it's dirty, there might be tiny handprints on your car. It almost never works. If you're really lucky, your car won't restart. Visiting Crybaby Bridge was the most important thing a couple of bored teenagers could do during Halloween last year. First came the stories with oddly specific details they added to the legend first. Suddenly your car doors would lock when you stopped on the bridge, or they wouldn't lock once you turned your engine off. Some people told me that they heard the ghost of the mother screaming her baby's name. Other people swore the radio would shuffle through stations despite nothing else in the car working. The most unique detail I picked up was a statusy voice asking where its baby went. Soon after the new additions to the legend started, people started exaggerating their experience. It began with shadowy figures along the walls of the covered bridge. Then it escalated into the doors being flung open. I saw a lot of people claiming that foggy black appendages reached in and tried to drag them from their disabled vehicle. Dark figures appearing against the walls of the bridge, skulking around their cars. No one had any evidence past their word. Until John went. His family has since deleted the video and have been declining questions about it for a while now. I think they just want it to go away. I wish it'd leave my head. The video starts before John and his friends pull onto the bridge. He comes to a dead stop, hits park, and kills the engine. His headlights start to flicker in the background. The radio screen flickers too. This woman appears at the far end of the bridge when the lights turn on. Then she's gone when they turn off. You can hear continuous static from the radio, and every time the lights flicker, she's a little closer to the car. When she gets about halfway to the car, you can start making out some of her features. She's kind of twisted up, her skin's white as snow, except for a deep red mark across her neck. Over the radio, something starts to come through. After a few repetitions, I easily recognized it as a gruff yet feminine voice. "Where's my baby?" The voice mumbled over and over. You could hear the car not starting. A brutal grinding sound as he tries the ignition, the passengers urging John to move the car. The passengers' voices turn into an old-fashioned of screams and pleas. The voice over the radio is almost drowned out by the passengers, but after watching the video a few times, I could focus on it. It was more and more frantic as it progressed, banging on the windows with her grayish hands. The camera view spins around the car. There's gray hands banging on all the windows, including the windshield and back window. The hands battering the windows blocked everything outside of the car from view. The windows shattered, one by one, with the hands disappearing into the blizzard of shards. In the chaos, the camera falls to the floor. The video ended with the woman's voice growling, then shrieking. They all made it home that night, no cuts or scrapes, bumps or bruises. The video was posted online but never received many views before it disappeared. First, the paper tried to talk to them, then the local people. No one ever had any luck. At school, they withdrew from people they were once close with and shunned anyone who asked about their night on the bridge. After Halloween passed, everyone's need to be scared out of their wits went by the wayside. Life went on, but John never seemed to be the same. He was suddenly on high alert all the time. In the halls, he would constantly check behind him. John always looked like he'd come off of a double shift and was headed straight into another one. I invited him over right before Thanksgiving. He'd been showing up to class less and less over the weeks following his number Crybaby Bridge video. The more scarce he became, the less they remembered the terrors of the bridge that night. We sat at the fire pit in the backyard and nursed shitty pisswater beers that I snagged from my dad's stash. He was still for the longest time. He just stared into the night. He'd lost the paranoia of the previous weeks. The hypervigilance had worn off. We sat in the quiet, wrapped in the silent air of the night, silent. "You know," he said, staring off into the dark of the night, "I don't think she's ever stopped searching." I sat my beer down. "What?" "You know what I'm talking about. For a while I saw her everywhere." He chugged from his can. "She crooned to me in the night, stalked me in the day." He shook the can side to side, stared into the emptiness of the can. The silence felt like it lasted eons to me, but he seemed to have shed all worry. I couldn't see a drop of despair, hopelessness, or sorrow. His face told me a story his tone would complement. There was defeat lacing his words, but his expressions, his body, his motions all spoke of acceptance. What exactly happened after? He crunched his can in his hand, then ran his hands across his face and through his hair. A frustrated exhalation. As soon as I got back to my bed, the tapping happened. At first it was like one small hand slapping the glass every couple of minutes. After a while, another one started coming from a different window, then from my bedroom door, closet door, then finally from my desk drawers. Another beer for John. He smiled to himself with a self-acknowledging nod. It was kind of chaotic. Every night it started, always just one, then more would join. It was kind of like a symphony. I'd just kind of stay put. I tried to stay in school, but I had to sleep at some point. I grunted and nodded in agreement with him. He shook his head at me. "Haven't you noticed the handprints?" No," I stammered. He stood up and started walking towards the driveway. I jumped up and followed him. "Check the bumpers, trunks, and tailgates." He bounced on his toes, every single one, little handprints. "Are you fucking with me? I was just worried about you, Dick." He smiled, shook his head, and wiped some of the dust from one of the bumpers. I never believed in any of that paranormal bullshit. It was all fun stories when we were kids. Even my parents said they never saw anything at Crybaby Bridge. I shrugged. My parents said they hadn't experienced anything either. So the video was real? What kind of fucking person do you think I am? Of course it was real. He opened his car door and sat sideways in the driver's seat. We stood there in an awkward silence again. "Do you think—" I stopped mid-sentence. He looked terrified. Whitewashed like a cartoon character that saw a ghost. "Can you hear it?" He searched around frantically from his seat. A dull thump slowly filled the driveway. I looked all around and under the cars. Nothing. Thump, thump, thump. His tires screeched as he whipped out of my driveway in reverse. "Don't fucking look at her and get inside," he yelled from his window before he sped down the dark road. I kept seeing black, misty, amorphous forms in the peripherals of my vision. I ran for my front door. I locked every door and window of the house, then closed every curtain and blind and turned on every light in the house, even lamps when overhead lights were already on. The house was filled with an eerie silence. A noise started, almost unnoticeable, from the front door. At first it could have been a cat scratching at it. It had a pattern, but I couldn't quite make out what made up the pattern. I snuck towards the door as quietly as I could. I pressed my ear to the door to try to make it out. It dawned on me that it was mumbling, the same indistinct thing, over and over slowly. Then the air conditioner kicked on, and my heart and larynx met. I settled my ear back against the door. The mumbling seemed to be getting closer to the door. It sounded like gebe mebebeb, over and over. I jumped back when the mail slot started rattling. The mail slot door shot open and the void was filled with two milky, bloodshot eyes. I slammed the inside flap shut. Whoever it was let out the most guttural, primal scream. A paper white hand burst through the mail slot and gripped the door and started jerking on it. The way the door flexed and creaked, you'd think it was Andre the Giant trying to break into my house. I'm not proud of it, but I called 911. I peeked through the peephole while the phone rang. She couldn't have been much bigger than 5-0, and maybe 100 pounds soaking wet. I stayed on the line. The operator answered and my phone flew to the ground. The door suddenly stopped. I picked up my phone, told the man on the other end of the line what happened, and that she appeared to be gone. He told me he'd send a cruiser my way anyway just to check the area for her. I hung up and looked in the mirror my mom kept by the entryway as a decoration. One by one, the edges gained small little handprints. Silent and spontaneous, it didn't have a pattern or even a source. Then the handprints started covering my reflection. They became more and more opaque as they blurred me out. My blur went from a grease on glass white to black in just a moment, and the mirror crashed to the ground. There she stood. It wasn't a dope head, it was the woman from John's video. She stared through me, bloodshot eyes twitching, her head cocked slightly back and to the side. She walked towards me, one hand covering her mouth, the other wrapped around her stomach. A thick red welt around her porcelain white neck stood out prominently. I couldn't see it coming at the time, but she raised her hand from her stomach and touched it to my cheek. Warm, wet, smelled metallic. I jerked backwards. Her hand was covered in blood. Her middle was nearly bisected. Her entire body shook. Her expression slid from sorrowful to scorned. She snarled her lip. I ran from the entryway, up the stairs and into the kitchen. She pursued. When she tried to enter the kitchen, she froze right before the doorway. She searched the door frame with her eyes. They locked onto something above the door. She laughed. It was hoarse and slow, but she laughed. She pointed up. "Cleverer," she creaked at me. "You give my baby." "I don't have a baby," I stuttered. She vanished. I tried to sleep in the kitchen that night, but the knocking on the windows kept me up. My parents got home late the next morning. After they got home, I looked above the doorway. A horseshoe was hanging. I called John, straight to voicemail. I spent some of the morning hanging horseshoes over my windows and doors. Fortunately, my mom has a thing for country western decor. I was sitting in my room at a loss. Was it over? Would she keep coming back? My phone startled me back to reality. The call came in as restricted Josh. "Have you seen John?" The voice trembled. "He was here last night. Who is this?" "I'm his mom. I've been calling numbers from his cell bill. They found his car wrecked last night, but he wasn't there." He hung out for a little, but he left around 10:30. I answered. We both sat silently for a moment. "I tried to call him this morning," I offered, but it went straight to voicemail. "Me too." I told her my mom needed me and promised to call if I found out anything. I stared out my bedroom window. Handprints all around the edges of the windows. My room is on the second floor. My phone started ringing. It read Ohio call and a number with my area code. "Hello?" I answered. "Josh, did she come for you?" "John, what the fuck? Your mom said you wrecked your car?" "Yeah, look, she came for me on my way home. I ran through the trees I wrecked into. I was running across a creek and I tripped and fell on a little island type shit. For whatever reason, she couldn't cross the water, so I crashed there." He sped through. "But what about you?" "She came through the big mirror in the front door." "What the fuck is she?" "I thought she was a ghost," John grumbled. "But when she reached through the mirror, she smacked me in the face." It felt like a honest-to-God person cracked me upside the head. Do you actually know a goddamn thing about what's going on? Fuck you, I've made it this far, John snapped back at me. By dumb fucking luck, apparently. Boop, he'd hung up on me. I scoured the internet for more information. I read and read as the sun disappeared into the horizon. There weren't any results for anyone who died on the bridge. The results for Crybaby Bridge were also sadly inconclusive. I started looking at things stopped by horseshoes, things stopped by iron. 2 results, consistently. Ghosts and witches. I called the local historical society. A lady with a little too much nasal passage answered the phone. Historical Society, how may I assist you? I was wondering about anything you knew about the old covered bridge. She was silent for a moment, then scoffed. That's just an urban legend, you know. I know, and it's silly, but it's been a really popular thing with my friends recently, and I wanted to see if I could learn anything to spook them. I already knew enough to scare every person in the state into a full-blown panic attack or coronary event. Call Ruth, she answered without hesitation. She knows more about it than anyone. Thanks. Where can I reach her? Wait. I should probably tell you, I think she's got some dementia going on. So please take it all with a handful of salt. I personally think she's on a one-way ticket to a ward, but she's our longest-standing member and has always had a fascination with those stories. She gave me her number. Before I hung up, I immediately called Ruth. Good afternoon, she chirped into the phone. Hi, the Historical Society said you knew a lot about the old covered bridge on the edge of town. She laughed. What would you like to know? I guess the biggest question is, did anyone really die on that bridge? Well, of course they have. A few horse-drawn carriage incidents, a few automobile accidents. You know that's not what kind of dying I'm talking about. I scolded. Oh, do you mean Eliza Lewis? She's the one the kids are talking about lately. What happened to her? It's all very sad. From what I've gathered reading old letters and journals, she was an outcast here. The local children were terrified of her, although it seems it was just because she lived here alone. Whispers of witchcraft flowed through our little town. All of the accounts from the time say our community just left her be. Then how'd she die? Well, apparently one of the local young men fell for her. It must have been in secret because eventually she started showing, and some of the more brazen residents took notice. They interrogated her, found out which Johnny Appleseed left his appleseed. He adamantly denied it, of course. He got trapped in his lie when a neighbor said they saw him coming and going at odd hours from her home. He played stupid. It was clearly her working some dark juju that brainwashed him into coming to her and performing the service of Venus, he told the town. Ruth took a moment. She was quiet, but her breathing was heavy. They bought it. Hook, line, and sinker. Ruth gave a disappointed chuckle. She had started to leave town while the meeting was in place. It started storming, so she took shelter in the old covered bridge you kids call Crybaby Bridge now. Oh shit, I interrupted. Oh shit is probably what she said when half of the town came up on her in the middle of a thunderstorm. She would hang that night in the oak tree that hangs over the river right there next to the bridge. While she swung in the tree, someone in the mob thought of the baby she carried. While she choked and sputtered, the monsters cut the baby from her abdomen. Did the baby live? I interrupted again. Some of the letters I've read say it was thrown down into the river, still screaming. Some say an old lady took it home to care for it. I can't really tell you which is true. They left her hanging there for days, though. The people were so convinced she was a witch that they left her hanging while someone put together a cast-iron casket for her. All of the eyewitnesses said she was buried vertically, head first in the iron casket. Occasionally, women suspected of witchcraft were buried that way so that they couldn't dig out as easily, and so that perhaps they would dig in the wrong direction. The iron casket was a special touch some special man thought of. He thought it'd seal her in. Ruth laughed to herself. I was quiet for a moment. So did it? Ruth exhaled like I'd sucked the fun from her lungs. She's dead and witches aren't real, darling. Where is she buried? In a little cemetery that was abandoned shortly after she was buried there. Everyone essentially refused to have their loved ones buried with a witch. But where is it? I pressed. She huffed. Don't do anything stupid. Just let the poor lady rest. Oh, I just wanted to see it for myself and maybe leave some flowers. She mumbled some deliberation to herself. All right, she said with an air of confidence. You seem like a genuinely nice kid, so just promise me you'll be respectful. Of course. If you go out Deer Trail, turn right after the tree, you'll see a patch of woods between 2 fields. It's all the way at the back of that wooded lot. Is it private property? Yep, but the owner doesn't keep up with it, so it'll be fine. I thanked her, then immediately called John. I sat in my bed and fidgeted with a horseshoe, nervously watching my windows. "What's up?" he answered. "They killed her because they thought she was a witch. She was pregnant, and they ripped the baby right out of her." Are you all right?" "The lady from the bridge, you dumb shit. Get your truck and get over here. We need to check her grave." He agreed and was on his way. I'm not sure why I was so adamant about checking her grave. Something kept telling me it would give me some kind of comfort or key to the whole shebang. We didn't talk much on the ride there. We could see black fog scattered through the trees along the side of the road. We drove faster. There was a little access road through the lot she had directed me to. It was overgrown with saplings and weeds. The truck pushed through. It felt like the fog closed in around us after we pulled off the main road. Towards the back, there was a little unfenced cemetery. We scoured through the old flat headstones. All the way back in the very corner, there it was, Eliza Lewis, no date or anything else. The air was still, the black haze was closing in around us. From behind, the fog yellow eyes started popping open, all in the tree line surrounding us. "Where is she?" An angry voice growled from behind us. We turned, there she was, standing between us and the truck. The fog and eyes seemed to be closing in around us. There must have been hundreds of pairs of eyes packing the brush and trees around the cemetery. She took shaky steps towards us. "Eliza Lewis," I barked with authority. She stopped dead in her tracks. Her eyes went wide, and she laughed a deep belly laugh. The eyes in the woods drew closer to us. As they neared the edge of the woods, they were faintly outlined in the shape of children, from toddlers to preteen size. I couldn't recognize any of them, but there were dozens. "Tell me!" she shrieked, pointing at John with an emaciated pointer finger. The surrounding bodies rushed him. I was thrown at least 10 feet to his truck with absolutely no effort. They seized both of his arms and lifted him up and back, his chest upward. Eliza swayed towards him. "Get away from him," I commanded. She didn't respond. She sashayed closer with an exhausted stutter between steps. "I fucking said let him go." My voice cracked with rage as I pulled myself up on his truck. It was silent other than my yelling. Then came the wet squish. She was wrist deep in his chest. She twisted her hand and he writhed in pain. He choked and gurgled while she started jerking her hand like she was trying to rip something out of him. I made eye contact with him. He stretched his arm out and pointed at the path out with a shaking hand. I scrambled into the truck. My heart sank. I didn't have the keys. My breathing spiraled out of control. I started getting lightheaded. Eliza turned a partial turn and looked dead at me. She rose her bloody hand from his chest, dragging something blue and hazy out of his chest. Her cold, unwavering stare stopped everything. My heart, my head, my panicked shaking. In a moment of clarity, something inside of me screamed to check the ignition. He left the keys. I hit the ignition, slammed the shifter into reverse, and went onto 2 wheels onto the road. Nothing in my mirrors, nothing on the roads alongside me. I checked my rear view mirror again. Fingerprints around the edges, very gradually, very slowly popping up. I ripped it right off the windshield and threw it out of my window. I blew through every stop sign and light on my way home. I'm surprised I made it just from the trip home. I holed back up in my room. Then my phone started ringing. I picked it up and was greeted with "Incoming call, John." My brain stopped working for a second. I guess the harsh reality of what happened hadn't really set in yet. I saw him die with my own eyes, but I swiped the green circle anyway with an enormous weight ripped from me. "John, how the fuck did you get out?" Silence, save for a little static. "John?" I asked. "John will help me find my baby." A raspy woman's voice whispered. I dropped my phone. It finally hit me that he died back there. The voice, no longer a whisper, cackled through my phone, louder than my phone had ever put out. I grabbed it and ended the call, but the laughter kept booming from my phone. I jerked the back plate off and ripped the battery from it. My room went silent. The slow laugh boomed through my room. My windows rattled in their frames, covering my ears offered no relief. I curled up on my bed and clutched my ears. It all went quiet again when something slammed against my window. There was Eliza, floating, staring in my second-story window at me. She pointed at me and smiled a sweet smile. She slammed something into my window again. It was John, or some weird foggy blue version of John that she could fling around by a handful of his hair. He had this big shit-eating grin on his face, and his eyes were empty. To this day, I can't find the words that really describe it. Looking into them made me feel like he was simply a husk. He hung by his hair, his face smashed to my window. I did what any reasonable teenager would do. I hid under my blanket and cried. It felt like hours passed before I could muster the nerve to peek out from the safety of my cocoon. All clear. I called the police, told them that we were attacked visiting a cemetery for a friend, and I was afraid they'd killed John, but he told me to run for it. They said they'd send an officer by for a statement and to keep my doors locked just in case. I called Ruth. As soon as she answered, I blabbered into the phone. Eliza was there and she took my friend John somehow. I don't really fucking know what happened, but she came to me and was flinging him at my window or something. She exhaled through her mouth in frustration, then silence. Did she say anything to you? She asked nonchalantly. I stammered. She keeps saying something about a baby. I'm guessing you have a cross or cast iron or something above your window or door that's keeping her out too? Yeah, how'd you know? What the fuck's going on? Give me your address, I'm on my way. I gave her my address and stood by my window. I could see wispy blue figures standing barely in sight behind trees, cars, bushes, or whatever cover they could take. They stared straight up into my window, right into my eyes, even from the farthest reaches of my vision. Shortly after I hung up, a small gray car zipped into my driveway. The shadow-like figures drew near to the car. A short, stout woman with gray hair appeared out of the car. She walked up the drive with purpose, but also a deep-seated confidence. I watched Eliza's things start to swarm in on her, then suddenly zip off back to cover like cockroaches when the lights turn on. It's me, Ruth from the Historical Society, she yelled as she walked in the door. I ran into the hallway to meet her at the stairs. We shook hands. She looked like my grandma. Let's step outside. I stared at her blankly. There's these things out there. I swallowed hard and weighed my options for a moment. And this is going to sound either crazy or plain stupid, but I'm pretty sure they're after me. The drones will leave us be, dear, she assured me and squeezed my shoulder. She proceeded to pretty much shove me out of the front door. The sky had turned black in the short time that I'd been away from the windows, for as far as I could see in any direction. Call her out. I gave her the most sincere what the actual fuck look I have ever given someone. She motioned for me to get on with it. I stumbled with my words. I shouted her name out into the darkness. Nothing. Honey, really put yourself into it, Ruth calmly suggested. Eliza Lewis, I have your baby. The temperature dropped like a lead balloon. I could see my breath when it had been unseasonably warm just seconds before. Lightning struck from the clouds to the ground. Where? She boomed from the air. She was floating at least 10 feet in the air. Her eyes were angry. I could see her flayed open stomach. I could see the bruises on her neck. I started backing away to run back to the protection of my room. Ruth was in the way. Those little horseshoes might not keep her out right now, she warned in a delicate grandmotherly voice. She's pissed. I knew you had my baby, she screeched. The car and house windows rattled violently. Some of them cracked. Ruth approached her and reached out to her with her right hand. It's time for you to rest, Eliza. She shrieked again and pointed to Ruth. The drones swarmed towards her. Ruth looked up to Eliza, stared right into her eyes, and quietly said, No. The drones blew away like dust in the wind. Eliza became angrier and dropped to the ground. She appeared behind Ruth with no warning and tried to shove her hand through her like how she took John. I said, Number, Ruth reiterated. Eliza emitted a painful scream, her hand jammed against Ruth's back. She turned to face Eliza. Look in my eyes. Suddenly the air wasn't so heavy, the clouds lightened just a single shade. You have it, Eliza said in shock. You have the mark, are you? I hadn't noticed it before, but Ruth had the same birthmark under her eye as Eliza. I am, but I can't allow you to take any more living people, dear. Ruth made a fist and extended her arm back to Eliza. She broke down into a smoky black substance and then was sucked into Ruth's ring. She turned to me and squeezed my hands. Don't you mention this to a single person, not his family, not yours. But his mom should... No. No one will believe you, and if I find out you spilled the beans, I'll send her for you. I don't know if she'll ever see this. I don't know if John's mom will ever see this. But if they do, hope for mercy. If you visit a crybaby bridge in southern Ohio, maybe you know why nothing happens when you shut your car off at night now. I'm not sure how smart giving out personal information is after something I thought could only happen in movies actually happened, but I'm scared about what this all could mean, and I want people to hear and know about this if something happens to me. I assure you I am no on medication, suffer from no mental illnesses, and have no trauma of any kind and anything else you might think of. I am a completely average person living a completely average life. Well, I was, I guess, up until now. My name is Marielle. I'm from a small town in Georgia where everyone knows each other, and I work as a 911 operator. My family lives in a rural town out of state, and I haven't spoken to them about this yet out of fear that whatever's going on might somehow affect them too if I get them involved. Yesterday, I began my night shift the same way I do every evening. Most of the time, I get low priority calls and a few times pranks, and since I've been doing this for a few years now, I've grown quite good at discerning what's an actually concerning call. The shift was rather tame, up until I got what I thought was a prank call. 911. What's your emergency? I spoke into the phone after returning my cup of coffee back on the desk and readjusting myself. Someone's outside my house. They've been looking around my yard and windows for the past 2 minutes. It was a woman on the other end, her voice familiar ever since the first few words, but I couldn't quite place it yet. She spoke very fast. It was obvious how nervous she was about this. No surprise there. I would be too. I thought it was some friend, but I don't know this person and they look off. Okay, ma'am. Nudging my chair closer to the desk as I begin typing on the computer, I asked the lady another question in the meantime. Can you give me your address and tell me if you can see if this person is armed? Yeah, I'm the yellow house at X address. The woman continued, but I admit I didn't listen. She had just given my house address. I stopped my fingers in the middle of writing and sighed, thinking this must be one of my friends. We're a small bunch and very mischievous towards each other. Sort of out of character for our age, I must admit. But I've said numerous times how serious prank calling 911 can be for people. Who is this? You know how badly this can end for you, right? I reached for my coffee cup, rolling my eyes, and held my hand ready to hang up the call. But she continued. What? I don't get it, I'm serious. Please don't hang up. She retorted in a tone that caught me off guard. And then again, after a second, she returned to the previous somewhat panicked attitude. I'm sorry, but this isn't a joke, please. I'm afraid of what this person might do. Okay, ma'am. I put the cup back on the desk and was ready to prolong this call to enough of an extent to make this woman face the consequences for holding the line. What bad luck for her, I thought, to get the operator living at the exact house she decided would be her target. What's your name and which room are you in right now? I'm Marielle. I'm looking out my bedroom window right now. They're still there. My blood started to boil. How senseless this person must be. It was obviously a friend. I raised my voice this time, warning them again about how badly they will regret their actions if they prank call again. And just as I was about to hang up, Marielle started to beg me frantically not to. For whatever reason, something inside me was telling me to listen. I decided to give her one more chance, and then I would send the police over to arrest this prank caller and at the very least give her a slap on the wrist. Okay, Marielle, describe the bedroom to me. What? You heard me. What color are the curtains? Is there any furniture? Lamps? Tell me what you can see. Though I've known said friends for quite a while now, none of them have ever been in my house. I prefer it that way, not because I don't trust them to enter my home, but because I've never been fond of having guests. Neither did my parents when I was little. It's something they had that has transferred over to me. There's no way this person would, purple curtains, double bed with a grayish cover with white lines, a wardrobe and a small bedside table with a night lamp on it. She went on for a few seconds while I listened, completely dumbfounded. She was describing exactly how my bedroom looked. Her next words snapped me out of the confusion. Miss, why are you asking me this? There's someone outside my house. I couldn't answer her immediately. This was just so surreal, nothing like anything I'd experienced so far in this job. This woman, apparently named Marielle, who sounds just like me, claiming she lives at my address and is standing in the exact same bedroom as mine, was talking to me. Marielle, how did any of this make sense? I tried to keep my cool and continue talking to her normally, but I could hear the shakiness in my own voice when all I could mutter was an, "Okay, ma'am," before falling silent again and rummaged around my desk drawer to find my personal phone. My ex-husband had installed security cameras facing the front, back and sides of our house at different angles after some people started talking about the same car driving around their homes multiple times during the day and night. but nothing ever came out of it. It didn't hurt to have the extra security measure, but I never thought I'd actually have to use it. I opened the app while this Marielle kept repeating hello, but I was too preoccupied to answer. I admit my heart had dropped into my stomach at this point, and it only got worse after I opened the camera app. My bedroom window looked out of one of the sides of my house, and right beyond the wooden fence was someone pacing left and right while looking up at the house. I finally snapped back. "Okay, Marielle, okay. I'm sending a patrol car your way immediately. Excuse the holdup." I tried to regain my composure, but could still hear my words trembling as I spoke them out loud. While the person wasn't trespassing and technically not committing any crime, what puzzled me more was that I was currently completely free of any alcohol or drug influence, talking to myself, to another me. "Move away from the window to make sure he doesn't see you, do you?" I paused for a moment, taking in how ridiculous the whole situation was again, and finished my question, listening intently for the answer that was about to come from the other Marielle, not sure what I was expecting to hear. "Do you have a weapon in your house you could use in case his intentions become malevolent?" "I mean, the only thing I can think of right now are the knives in the kitchen, and there's an old pistol, but it's in the basement and the door to it is outside. Am I going to have to defend myself?" She sounded stressed out as she asked, but I was more shocked to hear the same exact words I'd have said in response to this question. "I have a pistol and it's in the basement, the door to which is outside." Still unable to comprehend all of this, I told Marielle, or me I guess, to check again and see where the person is, and reassured her that the patrol car is only a few minutes away from the house. Only now did I finally look around, thinking that I must be dreaming, and caught the gaze of a fellow coworker who had his eyebrow raised. He must have been listening in to my conversation and seen me acting off, but I tried to smile to the best of my ability and nod, quickly returning my focus to my screen before I could see his reaction. "Marielle, do you see them still?" I inquired, but got no response for another few moments. She then stumbled on her words, and I could hear the door creaking open just as my bedroom door did, and her footsteps rapidly moving from room to room, presumably looking out other windows. No, he's not out there now. I don't know where he is. Oh God, did I miss him? Is he coming towards my house?" She sounded like she was on the verge of a panic attack. I did my best trying to calm her down while searching for the person myself, switching between different cameras, and when I found him, I saw him in the backyard with an arm raised in the middle of the air. Moments later, a rock flew towards my kitchen window, and though the cameras have no audio to them, Marielle's shriek was perfectly timed in sync with the impact. Holy shit, he just broke one of my windows," she yelled frantically and began raving inaudibly into the phone. Marielle, get to your attic, quickly. The police will be at your place soon. Use anything you find up there to block the way in," I yelled back, raising my voice loud enough to overshadow hers and to probably scare my coworkers with the sudden decibel increase. Whatever was happening, it was real. There was someone outside my house who had just broken a window, and I was in there, afraid for my life. The advice I gave her was exactly what I would have done. The attic hatch is in the middle of the hallway leading from the living room to my bedroom, giving her enough time to get up there and block it afterwards, considering this person had to pass through the kitchen and then through the aforementioned parts of the house. By my calculations, Marielle had enough time to get there and use all the pent-up trash and whatever else she could find to hold the hatch shut for the little time left the police needed to arrive. I could hear Marielle slam the door behind her and run down the laminated hallway towards the hatch, and then I gasped audibly as she yelled into the speaker, and the phone dropped with a loud thud, her footsteps becoming more and more distant as another heavier set made their way faster and faster through the hallway and closer to the phone. "Are you still there? The police are almost at your location," was all I could think to say in my last effort to scare whoever this person was away. A few seconds of silence, and I expected to hear something, anything, some scary, cryptid remark or at least breathing, but there was nothing. My last word into the receiver was an empty hello before the other end hung up. I couldn't believe what had just happened, and must have sat at my desk staring into the screen for at least 2 minutes before the same coworker from earlier, Connor, came and put his hand on my shoulder, prompting me to scream and push him away. The entire office looked our way, and he put his hands up in the air. I apologized profusely more times than I could count. Everyone turned back to their desks, and Connor lowered his hands. "Tough call?" he asked and leaned on my desk, handing me a chocolate bar. "You seemed really on edge the entire time and, well, this just confirms it." I didn't even acknowledge the snack after I looked at it and just met his eyes again, not knowing what to say. I began with a few disconnected words before excusing myself and leaving the shift early. It's a little after 2:30 as I finish writing this. I booked myself a room into the most crowded hotel I could find, with the room closest to the stairs leading to the reception, shutting the blinds and locking the door twice. I'm afraid to go home, and I don't know who to talk to about this without sounding completely insane. I've heard nothing from the responding police officers yet, and I don't know what to do about this tomorrow. Anyone reading this, please believe me, and even if you don't, can you please offer me some advice? I would like to make something very clear here. I usually never get scared. When I say never, I truly mean never. I'm a huge fan of horror, but I never felt fear from anything in my life. Mild discomfort at most, but even that's rare. That is until what I experienced 5 minutes ago. It's 5:15 a.m. and I never felt such fear before. For context, I live with my grandma. She just turned 82 last week, and I took time off work to visit and spent time with her in Virginia. I'm 25 and work as a financial analyst in New York. She's raised me all my life, and we're extremely close. Genuinely the sweetest woman I know. However, the incident I just experienced makes me uncomfortable. Yesterday, we were watching TV in the living room, and she was getting a little tired. My grandma is an early bird, so she usually goes to bed at 8:30 to 9 p.m. every night. Tonight was no different. As she got up from the chair she's had since I could remember, she hugged me goodnight and headed upstairs to her bedroom. I'm a night owl and usually don't go to bed until 4:30 to 5 a.m. LOL, so I chose to stay up a bit longer. A few hours pass and I was still watching TV. However, I started hearing a faint banging sound from afar. I couldn't wrap my finger around it, but I ignored it at first. My grandma lives in the middle of the forest in a cabin, so I assumed it was an animal outside scraping for food or something. 5 minutes later, and the banging got a bit louder. The weird thing is that the bangs were consistent, if that makes any sense. I don't know where it was coming from, but it certainly came from outside the house. I started getting a bit concerned when it wasn't stopping, so I went upstairs to check on Grandma. Thankfully, she was fast asleep, and all the windows were locked. By the time I made it to her bedroom, the banging had stopped, so I let it be and walked back down. It was 2 a.m. by this point, and I figured it was time to at least try to go to sleep since I have insomnia. So I got ready and headed to the guest bedroom, which is where I slept. What felt like a few hours passed, and the banging came back. I hadn't fallen asleep yet, so I could vividly hear the moment it returned. However, this time, it was a little stranger. Not only was it much, much louder, but also it wasn't just a banging sound. I could also hear screaming coming behind it. A what seemed to be blood-curdling scream of a person yelling for help. The longer I waited, the louder it got. Eventually, I got pissed off and got out of bed. With my phone flashlight at hand, I followed where the bangs and screaming were coming from. But suddenly, just as I had made it to the living room, it had stopped. "TJ, are you okay?" I heard. I turned around and saw my grandma standing on the other side of the hallway. "Yeah, just that I heard a lot of banging and screaming from outside," I replied. "Banging and screaming?" Grandma seemed confused. "Yeah, but maybe it was just an animal or something," I said while dimming the phone flashlight. Although I didn't believe for a second that it was just an animal, I didn't want to make my grandma worried or cause any problems for the night. Besides, it had already stopped, so I hoped that it wouldn't come back. Grandma sighed. "Things like that happen around here sometimes. You should get some sleep, sweetie. It's late and we have plans tomorrow." I smiled. "Yes, Grandma, I will. Love you." I hugged her and went back to my room where I eventually dozed off. I could hear my grandma turning on the TV and cooking herself breakfast as usual. The next day passed by in a flash and nighttime came by again. I hadn't thought of what happened the night before and just saw it as a normal day. That is, until I realized that it was 1 a.m. and my grandma was still wide awake. Not just that, but also a lot more talkative than usual, too. This wouldn't have caught me off guard if it weren't for the fact that she never stayed up past 9 p.m. for the last 20 years. "Hey, Grandma," I asked, "shouldn't you go to bed? It's late for you." "Oh, sweetie, but I'm not tired," she said. "I'll go in a bit, don't worry." It was starting to get late, even for my standards. "You should go to bed soon, it's getting late. I'll go now, good night," I said. As I laid down on my bed, I closed my eyes. After what felt like 15 minutes, I heard that faint sound again, banging. As it got louder, the blood-curdling scream followed. "What the fuck?" I muttered under my breath as I swiftly pushed the duvet off me. Grabbing my flashlight, I went back to investigate, this time with the intention of figuring out what it was. As I slowly opened the door, I tiptoed around the house, following the sound. It seemed like my grandma was back upstairs, sleeping, so I tried to be as quiet as possible, even though banging and screaming wasn't helping. Although I didn't feel scared of what was happening. Like I said, I don't get scared easily. I was getting a bit uncomfortable as the sound worsened the closer I got to it. "What the fuck?" I muttered again. As I walked closer, the banging and screaming got progressively louder. Suddenly, I paused. There was no mistaking it. The banging and screaming was coming from the other side of the storage room door, the room my grandma keeps her stuff in. As I reached out to it, I felt a cold presence send shivers down my spine. I gasped and staggered backwards. As I quickly turned around, I saw my grandma standing at the other side of the hallway. But this time, she looked different. Her back completely straight, her skin was pale, her soulless, lifeless stare piercing through me. It was the first time I had seen a human without a single sign of a catchlight shining her eyes. It was a tense and deadly but lifeless expression, one I can't describe in words. However, it was the first time I felt danger, looking at the lady who had raised me for 25 years. Her face was glowing from the moonlight outside, although the rest of her body was surrounded by darkness. From afar, it looked like a floating head. Suddenly, her eyes widened and there followed a smile. However, not a single wrinkle formed around her eyes. It was ominous. Nothing could convince me that the person standing in front of me was my grandmother. It barely felt human. "TJ," she said, her voice toned flat. "What are you doing?" I began shaking. By this point, the screaming had stopped. It was silent. I began stuttering, then stayed quiet. No word escaped from my lips. For the first time in my life, I felt genuine fear. "TJ," repeated my grandma, her voice tone still flat. My body tensed up as I looked at her. I could barely breathe. "What are you doing?" said my grandma, slower than before. I took a deep breath, hoping that any ounce of my body could relax enough so I could form a sentence. "I'm sorry, Grandma," I said, my voice cracking. I was curious on what the screaming was. Grandma's smile dropped instantly and her eyes widened further. "What scream?" My body tensed again. It felt like I was getting stares from all angles. I suddenly felt something cold touch my bare feet. As I looked down, I saw what looked like blood leaking from the storage room door, reaching to my feet. "Thomas Jr.," said my grandma, raising her voice slightly. I gulped and looked back up. "Yes?" "What scream?" she repeated, her voice deepening slightly. Only one sentence could come out of me at that moment. "Maybe it was just a dream. I'm sorry, Grandma." Her eyes widened further, although her stare only became more tense. "Go to sleep now," she said, enunciating every word. She sounded deeper than before, almost inhumane. "Yes, Grandma," I said, my body tensing up further. As I walked towards her, a sense of pressure dawned over me. Walking past her, I could feel her stare stabbing my head. Walking to my room, I closed the door and hid under the covers. Checking my foot, my suspicions were correct. What I felt leaking from under the storage room door wasn't just water, it was cold blood. This event leads to me writing this down. I don't know what to do. My grandma's stare, if she even was my grandma at that moment, is implanted into my brain. I feel a cold presence looming over me. I'm still shaking, hoping that the morning comes ASAP and I can forget about this. What should I do? Please, I need all the help I can get. I don't know what to do. The officer responded to the call at the 9,700 row of houses on the far end of Deal, near where the sand merges into Asbury. A 4:35, which wasn't atypical for late September, especially with the weather staying warm as it had been. The old man was leaning against the back of a car. His unsteadiness betrayed a line the officer first clocked as intoxication. "You're not arrested," he said, "just detained." He flipped open a pocket notebook and took a pen from the spiral. "Your name." The man muttered something. The officer wrote it down. "What are you doing here, Bobby?" "Oh, it's almost that time again." He looked old and indistinguishable in the way men do near the end of their life, when once distinctive features start to melt into a jowly hole. The hoodie, straps pulled tight around his neckline, didn't help. "What time is that, sir?" "Time to sit at the table. Renew the deal. Contract terms." "I don't know about all that, but I do know why I'm here. Someone called us. Said a man was wandering down the alley between the houses. Didn't make them feel safe, as I'm sure you can imagine." The old man mumbled something. "What's that?" "Didn't mean to frighten. Can you tell me what you're doing here?" "Like I said. Came out here for the deal. We had a show earlier, slick crowd. But afterward, I came out here for the deal." "You mean you came out here to deal?" The old man grinned. His teeth were well weathered. "I catch the irony," he said. "Never count on him not to joke around. But no, I came out to deal for the deal." "Can you tell me about this deal?" The old man lit a cigarette and puffed. His fingernails were long and yellow. The fingers themselves appeared calloused but delicate. I remember the first time like a dream I had this morning. He was crimson. He isn't always. He told me his name, but I didn't believe him. So he took me to the surface all the way up. It was a long ladder. Longer than you can imagine, long as only God can imagine. He showed me what lies after, what lies above. But the divider was so cold, it hadn't even started to thaw. The old man exhaled a long mist of white. He took me back, and that's when it went down. The officer felt a test on his patience, but he practiced the breath reliance from training and got ahead of it. "Okay, but my concern now is identifying you. Can I have your ID? Don't have it. Where is it? On the bus. Can you get someone to bring it here? Like I said, you're not arrested, but I can't let you leave until I verify who you are." The old man nodded. "Let me call Al. He'll bring it." He took out a fancy electronic phone, punched a few buttons, and spoke. He nodded, said something else, and hung up. "Al's coming by. Should be here in 10. But 15 minutes later, Al still hadn't arrived. The officer came out of his car, where he'd run the man's information, and asked if there was any update on the ID. The old man fidgeted, shrugged. "Be here soon," he said. "That's all I know. Can you call him again?" Tried, didn't answer. The officer pinched the bridge of his nose. This was going to be a pain to write up. "I'm sorry. Can you tell me again why you're here? What was it? To make some kind of deal?" The old man tapped a packet of cigarettes. Looked like unfiltered Winstons. He pulled one out and lit it. "Not to make a deal. To underline it. Third time. Tablet number 3, as they say." "I don't understand. People think it's one meeting, and it is, the first time. But one of the first things he tells you, who is he?" Mr. D. You know, the chief commander. Lay of the land type lord. He tells you at the first one what they call the crossroads. He lays it out. 3 meetings spread a bunch of years apart for the purpose of a check and call. Like any good partnership. And this is a good partnership, even where it's bad. 3 meetings? 3 meetings. The smoke rose around the old man's face. The first was just past Hoboken. Like I said, a ladder to the frozen top, and when I came down I could see things in that way that to write 'em means you'd feel 'em, you know? Well, you know even if you don't know. Where was the second meeting? Weehawken? The man didn't smile. No, not Weehawken. Not America, even. It was in Rome. Nitten Cetito. I must have been Tredisive. Mr. D. He showed me the sigils on the canvas and took me to the place of the skull. At the moment it went down. I know this sounds strange to hear, but I saw it. I saw it with my own eyes. Golgotha. The second of great pause. I saw them carry him around. He pulled out a necklace from within his hoodie. Light from the overhead glinted on it. A small silver cross. He showed me his pain, and I saw it and felt it and wrote it, and when I came back, they called it a period. I don't know anything about that. I saw a god killed and a son altered, or is it altered? The old man smiled. You know, with an A. And what about the third meeting? That's why I'm here. Was supposed to be tonight, right around these parts. But your friend, Mr. D. He what, never showed? Apparently not, the old man said, and I gotta say I'm surprised as you. There was a noise from the direction of the house. Both men turned. A bald man in a robe and slippers approached. You guys are still here. Is everything okay? Who are you? The officer asked. I live there. I made the call. What's going on? Hold on a moment, the officer told the old man. Stay here. To the homeowner, he said, Can you come with me? I want to ask a few questions. Get your info. The two walked a little down the road, keeping their eyes on the old man, who was still leaning against the parked car. The officer explained the situation. The homeowner listened, nodded, shook his head, and retreated into his house. The old man was speaking into his phone when the officer returned. Uh-huh, he said. That's right. Okay. He hung up. 2 minutes. He'll be here in 2 minutes. Perfect. There was a silence broken only by static from the officer's radio. The old man lit another cigarette. You probably don't believe a word I'm saying, and that's okay. It's a relief to think I'm wrong. If I'm wrong about tonight. He sipped on his smoke and stared off at the distance. Except I'm not. I know I'm not. I've had dreams, man. Ever since that first meeting, I've had enough dreams to convince me. The officer didn't say anything. Didn't take the bait. He bet it wouldn't matter, and he was right. Did you ever have a dream that you couldn't explain? The officer shrugged. He pulled his notepad back out, more to have something to do than for utility. Some are more like visions. They're awful, all of them. Destruction, blindness, death, that sort of thing. They've slowed now, and I know better how to dull them, but they still come. Just about one every other month. Slow murder of the master. The officer clicked his pen cap on and off, on and off. Sounds more like nightmares. They are. Tell me about them. The man's gaze was shrewd enough to shave off a decade. You want to hear this shit? The officer nodded. For the first time, he noticed just how blue the man's eyes were, electric blue and bright in a way that seemed confined to occurrences in nature. Most commonly, the buildup and discharge of electrical energy in the atmosphere. Well, okay, sometimes I'm on a stage, feet stuck to the wood. The audience is all skeletons. The sockets of their eyes watch me like hawks of the valley. My fingers bleed, my voice breaks, my heart gives out, my God crumbles. It doesn't matter, I keep playing, I got to. The dead is so long. He lit another cigarette. There's one where everyone I've known faces me in the same room. They're all dressed like me. They all act like me. They talk like me. Hell, they fuck like me. And then their words turn into, what do you call them, sheaths, and they pull out these knives and throw them at the tree. Suddenly I'm the tree. And the knives hurt, I gotta tell you. Sometimes I'm running. Just running, I'm wearing good sneakers and trendy clothes, and I'm in good shape and all that. But it's a nightmare. I fucking hate running, man. My version of hell. Then there's the apocalypse shit. Torrents of the Book of Revelations. That's awful for the same reason God is, it's the same. Oh hey, is it him? Looks like Al. The officer turned. A beam of headlights cut across the road. A car was pulling up, red and low and expensive looking enough to concretize this experience. The officer waved it over and approached. The driver wore sunglasses and smiled in a way that betrayed great affluence and even greater boredom. The officer asked him to roll down the window all the way. He decided for the time being to let the tints go. Are you Al? Who's Al? I'm Jerry. The officer looked up from his notepad. Are you here to help with the guy? Bobby? Yeah, I'm here to bail him out. Said he needed his ID. The driver held up a passport. The officer took it to his car. He went through it, confirmed it, called it in to dispatch, and felt greatly relieved. Not only was it now official and also cool as hell, a story to tell at dinner parties for years to come, but it significantly lightened his workload. He got out of his car, returned the passport to the driver, and waved the old man over. The old man shuffled near. When he reached the driver's side, he smiled. Hi, Al. I'm not Al. I'm Jerry. Right. Jerry, hi, Jerry. Good to see you. The old man's smile was genuine. Celebrities are known eccentrics, as the officer would later recount at this part in his telling of the story. That was his only explanation. It seemed as if the two men had never met and yet were old friends. The officer asked for an autograph and a handshake. The old man obliged, not taking his eyes off the driver once. The officer was surprised at the famous singer's limp noodle grip. The old man walked around the vehicle and got into the passenger seat. In silence, the two watched the officer enter his own car, turn his lights off, beep lightly in parting, and peel away. The driver smiled. He no longer appeared as human. It's nice to see you, dear. It was never about horns or hooves, H&H or 8 and 8. It was and it is and it was and it wasn't. You too, buddy. It's nice to see you, dear. But if you don't mind. What? Oh, sorry. The old man tucked his necklace under his hoodie. Thank you. It's nice to see you, dear. It's been so long. You've added years, friend, you haven't. You look mellow like wine. Must be nice, Johann. And then a sound near incomprehensible, hoofy laughter. You've added years, but you're still you. The driver put the car in drive, and then they were moving. The two chatted like old friends off into the unseasonably warm Jersey night. Only it was no longer night, and it was no longer Jersey. They were rungs now, the two of them, rungs on a ladder, rising and rising up to the place above the waters that separate this from that. And the old man, The poet, the Faustian clown, designee of a delivered deal, wore his ascent, his revelation as rung, as well as both times before. The two rung upward the ladder until they were the ladder, and the ladder was everything, climbing up to forever itself a part of everything. A ladder to thee. Emily was quiet, always that way. Her family and friends called her Emma, a softer, simpler name that seemed to fit her better. She had a gentle smile and a quiet laugh, but there was something about her that people couldn't quite put their finger on. She wasn't the type to stand out, but she had a way of pulling people in, making them feel like they could confide in her. But things began to change. One evening, her mother walked into Emma's room, concerned when she saw her sitting in front of the computer, her eyes wide and fixed on the screen. "Emma?" her mother said softly. "What are you doing?" Emma didn't move. Her lips were trembling, her face pale. It was like she wasn't really there. "Emma?" her mother asked again, her voice shaking now. Emma's gaze was hollow. "I'm watching," she whispered, but there was no emotion in her voice. "What are you watching?" her mother pressed, her worry deepening. "Nothing," Emma said, shaking her head as if trying to pull herself out of a trance. The next day, Emma didn't talk much. She barely ate. Her eyes were sunken, her hands trembling slightly as she moved through the house. Her parents knew something was terribly wrong, but every time they asked her, she simply shrugged and said, "I'm fine." Then one night, she didn't come home. It wasn't like Emma to go out late, especially without calling or texting. Her parents called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. The police were called, and soon the entire neighborhood was searching. But Emma was gone. A month later, she showed up at their doorstep. Her clothes were tattered, her hair matted, and her eyes empty. She didn't speak. She barely even moved. Her family tried to ask questions, but she sat there in silence, her face blank. It wasn't until they found her laptop that they understood what had happened. Deep in her browser history were forums, encrypted messages, and links to the dark web, a place no parent should ever have to see. Videos, images, they made her parents sick just looking at them. She had been kidnapped, abused, sold to a world of horrors they couldn't comprehend. Her family tried to bring her back, to pull her out of the darkness, but it was no use. Emma wasn't the same. She barely spoke, and when she did, her voice was distant, almost robotic. Sometimes she'd sit in the corner of the room, her fingers twitching, her eyes staring at something invisible. "They're watching," she'd say in a hushed, broken voice. "They're always watching." At first, her family thought it was paranoia, but soon they began to see the truth. The darkness hadn't left her. It had burrowed into her, creeping into her very being. Every night, they locked the doors tightly, kept the lights on, and prayed she wouldn't leave again. But no matter what they did, they couldn't protect her. The nightmares were real. The things she had seen, the things done to her. It was a living horror that consumed her. One evening, her father found her in front of the computer again. She wasn't looking at a screen this time. Her gaze was locked on something no one else could see. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice hollow. "They know." Her father begged her to speak, to tell him what was happening, but Emma only shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "There's no escape," she said quietly. "They'll find me." And they did. Every night they came for her, just out of sight, just beyond her reach. Her family knew there was no saving her anymore. Not from the dark web, not from the horror. Emma wasn't their daughter anymore. She was something else entirely. Something lost in a nightmare that had no end. The tires crunched over snow as we rounded the final bend, the cabin coming into view just as the sun dipped behind the mountains. It looked exactly like the pictures, quaint, tucked into the trees that picturesquely hid a roof that needed replacing. The kind of place someone more optimistic might describe as charming. I wanted it to feel charming. I wanted Claire to see it that way too. "Here we are," I said, forcing a little enthusiasm into my voice as I pulled into the narrow driveway. Claire didn't respond. She was staring at her phone, thumbs scrolling slowly, her face bathed in the faint blue glow. "Looks nice, doesn't it?" I tried again, louder this time. She glanced up, eyes flicking to the cabin, then back to her screen. "It's fine," she murmured. I killed the engine and sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. Fine. Of course it was fine. That's how everything was with us these days. Just fine. The wind picked up as I stepped out of the car, sharp and bitter against my face. The sky hung low and heavy, the snow swirling in lazy drifts that would soon grow into something heavier. I turned, taking in my surroundings. The cabin sat perched on the mountainside, the winding road we'd taken visible below, snaking through the trees like a thin, fragile thread. The road had split and veered back toward town a quarter-mile before, leaving only a slick, cobbled driveway behind. For the first time in months, there was no sound of traffic, no hum of engines or distant voices. Just the wind, growing louder by the second, and the soft, eerie hush of falling snow. The kind of quiet that presses in on you, suffocating until you're not sure whether it's the world holding its breath or you. I looked back at Claire, still sitting in the passenger seat. She'd finally looked up from her phone and seemed to really be taking in the cabin. For a second I was hopeful that she was excited to be here, but I quickly realized her face was washed with a vague disdain for the building. "Can you grab your bags?" I asked, leaning back in the door. She sighed a little too loudly and climbed out, shivering as she zipped her coat and put her phone in her pocket. "It's freezing." "It's December in Colorado," I said, trying for humor. "What did you expect?" She didn't laugh. The cabin door resisted when I pushed it open, the wood swollen and warped from years of wear and weather. Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of pine and something musty, the dull, damp scent reminding me of our little apartment back home. The floors groaned underfoot as I stepped in, the sound muffled by faded rugs and soft wood. A stone fireplace dominated the far wall, and a small kitchen sat off to the left, its appliances outdated but at least appearing functional. To our right, a narrow hallway with 2 doors and a pull-down attic string seemed to be the way to our bathroom and bedroom. Generic framed paintings and kitschy souvenirs adorned the hall, gathering dust. Telltale signs of a home that had been long delegated to live out its days as a holiday rental. "It's cozy," I said, setting our bags down by the door. Claire brushed past me without a word, heading straight for the couch. She dropped onto it, pulling her phone out again and scrolling as if it were the only thing keeping her tethered to the world. At least she looked comfortable to finally be out of the car. I sighed, my breath puffing out in the chilly air as I set our bags down. "I'll get the fire going." The fireplace was old, caked in soot, and looked like it probably hadn't passed an inspection in decades, but there was a neat stack of logs and kindling waiting beside it. I knelt down, striking a few damp matches until one finally lit, and coaxed a flame to life. Warmth crept into the room as the fire caught, long shadows dancing across the wooden walls. "Better?" I asked, glancing at Claire. She looked up and flashed me a curt smile and nod before burying herself again in her phone. I found myself soured at the realization that her signal here must somehow be decent enough to keep endlessly scrolling. I busied myself unpacking, the silence between us growing heavier with each passing minute. The snow had started falling harder now, the wind rattling the windows. The cabin groaned softly, the sound deep and patient, like a long-held sigh. I paused, listening, but it was just the home shifting under the slowly increasing burden of the snow on the roof. "At least this place has some character," I said, trying to break the silence. Claire didn't respond. I sat down next to her, rubbing my hands together as I tried to ignore the vague dampness of the couch. "Look, Claire, I know this trip isn't exactly your idea of relaxing, but I thought—" "I'm tired," she cut in, standing abruptly. "I'm going to bed." "Claire?" She was already walking down the hall, her footsteps sharp against the creaky floorboards. A door shut, and I was left alone with the fire and the sound of the growing storm outside. I leaned back, staring at the dancing flames. I pulled a blanket out of one of my bags, and was relieved to find that the couch reclined. "Maybe it would be best if you slept on the couch tonight." Claire's words from days prior rattled through my head. It hadn't just been that night. We hadn't slept in the same room since. I had hoped that would change tonight, but I resigned myself to fall asleep by the crackling fire. The cabin let out another low groan, the sound making the hairs on the back of my neck prickle. I looked out the window once more and realized that the growing storm had become a blizzard. Cold air blew in through the crack under the front door, and I could tell my car wasn't moving anytime soon. It was going to be a long night. Morning crept in slowly, the storm outside reduced to a dull whisper of snow against the windows. The fire had died overnight, leaving the cabin bitterly cold. I dragged myself off the couch and pulled on a sweatshirt, shivering as I walked into the kitchen. Claire was already up, sitting at the small table by the window, her coffee mug sitting in front of her on the table, untouched. She wasn't looking at her phone, which felt like progress, but her eyes were fixed on the snow-covered trees outside. Her head was tilted towards the hallway as though she were listening for me coming. "Morning," I said, grabbing the remaining chipped mug from the counter. "Morning," she replied quietly, not turning to look at me. I poured myself some coffee, the pot nearly cold since she'd made it. She must have been up for hours. "The storm looks like it's easing up," I said, leaning against the counter. "Maybe we could take a walk later, get some fresh air." She made a vague noise of hesitant agreement, but her body language was closed off. Legs tucked under her, shoulders hunched. It wasn't outright hostility, but it wasn't exactly welcoming either. I watched her for a moment, my coffee growing colder in my hands. I couldn't stop myself from thinking about the things she'd said to me during our last fight, words that had settled into me like splinters. "If you want to book that stupid anniversary trip, go right ahead. You just bulldoze ahead like what you want is the only thing that matters." I took a deep breath and turned away, sipping my coffee. That's when I heard it, a faint sound, just on the edge of my perception. I froze, tilting my head toward the hallway. It was so faint that I couldn't be sure I wasn't imagining it, like the hum of an appliance or a distant murmur muffled through walls. "You hear that?" I asked. "Hear what?" Claire's voice sounded annoyed, but she glanced over her shoulder towards the hallway as well. "That, I don't know, a noise. It sounds like talking, singing maybe?" She frowned. "It's probably the wind." "Maybe," I muttered. We finished up our coffee and put our mugs in the sink. We'd long fallen out of our habit of washing dishes together, and there wasn't a dishwasher in sight. As I began to slip on my boots, Claire slowly shambled to the bedroom, with no indication that she'd be getting dressed for our walk. "Aren't you going to join me, honey? The storm's clearing up. It'll be nice to get out of here for a bit." There was a moment of silence, and I thought she would ignore me once more. But after a moment, her voice mumbled through the cracked bedroom door. "This trip will be a lot easier for the both of us if we don't have to pretend. Go on your walk. I'll be here on my phone." My anger finally burst forth, having been restrained in an attempt to salvage this trip. "You think I'm the one making this harder than it has to be? You're impossible to talk to, Claire." I shouted towards the door. I heard her stand, feet shuffling towards the bedroom door, and it slammed shut. The house groaned in response, then settled, and once more the silence was swallowed up by the faint murmuring noise coming from the hallway. The noise didn't go away. As the day went on, it remained at the edge of my awareness, faint but persistent. I tried to ignore it, chalking it up to maybe wind blowing through a hole in the roof, or perhaps even a small animal seeking shelter from the cold. It made me uneasy. There was a familiarity to the noise that I couldn't place. We ate dinner in near silence, the tension between us heavy enough to fill the small kitchen. Claire pushed her canned pasta around her plate, barely eating. "Is it bothering you?" I asked finally. She looked up, startled that I'd broken the quiet. "Is what bothering me?" "The noise. I thought maybe—" "I don't hear anything," she said quickly, cutting me off. I opened my mouth to argue, but stopped myself. I'd learned by now not to tell her when I thought she was wrong about something. Instead, I finished my meal in silence, the faint static prickling at the edge of my hearing. It wasn't until we were piling our dishes in the sink when the cold wind stopped entirely for the first time since our arrival, and the sound was louder than it had ever been. Claire turned her head towards the hallway, and I grinned. "So you do hear it." I'll admit I was a little smug when she rolled her eyes at me. "Fine, I hear it, but it's nothing, just this stupid old cabin falling apart." Claire turned to walk towards the hallway, and I began to walk towards my makeshift bed on the couch, when she turned towards me, sighed, and gestured for me to join her in the bedroom. I happily took my blanket from the couch, and finally went to bed with a little warmth. As I fell asleep, I dreamt of our wedding day. It's ironic, on a trip that was intended to celebrate our 5th anniversary, it was the first time my wedding had even crossed my mind. I dreamt I was at the altar, holding hands with my wife. Her palms felt cold and clammy in my own, and she looked upset. I looked at her, trying to imagine a future in which we could be happy, but her scowl burnt holes through my hope. As the minister began to conclude the ceremony and asked if anyone in the crowd held objections, A voice rang from the audience. I turned towards the crowd and was shocked to see Claire, or yet another Claire. She was dressed comfortably, in the sweater she'd worn on our first date. She looked radiant, smiling like how she used to, and was eagerly trying to get my attention. Jason, I love you. Come here. Come to me, please, don't do this," she cried as though it were of utmost urgency. I turned back to my bride-to-be and was taken aback to find her withering before me, her skin sallowed and stretched tight over her bones, her rosy cheeks deflating and her eyes growing darker. I couldn't look away as she guided my hand to her side, wet with blood. I awoke in a cold sweat to the noise from above. It was louder now, unmistakable. Not static exactly, but something uneven and distorted, like voices filtering through a bad connection. I sat up in bed, heart thudding in my chest. Claire stirred beside me, groaning softly. "Jason?" she mumbled. "Do you hear that?" I asked, my voice low. She didn't answer right away, but her face tensed as she strained to listen. The sound wasn't just faint anymore, it was distinct, tangible. I could finally make out the noise. It was voices. Rushed, muted speech, garbled by a grumbling static, the words muddy and indiscernible. "Is that a radio?" she asked, sitting up. "I think so," I said, already climbing out of bed. We followed the sound into the hallway, our footsteps loud on the creaky floor. The noise grew stronger as we neared the end of the hall, where a pull-down attic door sat flush with the ceiling. "What the hell?" Claire muttered, staring at it. I reached up, tugging the ladder rope down with a loud groan of wood and metal. It didn't budge. Claire fished her phone out of her pajama pocket and shone her flashlight up towards the attic door. There was a small 4-digit padlock holding the door shut. The owners clearly didn't want any guests entering the attic. The noise was much clearer now, a steady static interspersed with faint bursts of garbled speech. "You think the owners left a radio on up there?" I asked. "Maybe," she said, though her tone was uncertain. "We should call them." I nodded, pulling out my phone. The number that was left on the Airbnb listing went straight to voicemail. I left a message, trying to sound calm but insistent. "Guess we'll just have to deal with it for now," I said, uneasy at the thought of leaving it playing all through the night. Claire's expression hardened. "Deal with it? How are we supposed to sleep with that going on?" "I don't know, okay?" I snapped, my annoyance bubbling over and giving way to anger. "What do you want me to do, break in?" Her eyes narrowed. "Don't start." "I'm not starting anything," I shot back. She stormed off without another word, the bedroom door slamming behind her. I stood alone in the hallway, staring up at the attic door. The static buzzed in my ears, louder now, almost rhythmic. It felt like it was waiting for something. The next morning I found Claire in the kitchen again, standing by the counter with her arms crossed and a mug of untouched coffee sitting beside her. She wasn't scrolling through her phone this time, just staring out the window as the storm's remnants swirled in slow, aimless patterns. The radio hadn't stopped. It had finally grown quieter in the early hours of the morning, but now it was back. Faint but persistent, distorted speech pouring through the ceiling, filling the air with tension. "You didn't sleep, did you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. She turned her head slightly, just enough to glance at me from the corner of her eye. "Hard to sleep when there's a radio running all night." I sighed and leaned against the doorway. I already tried calling the owner again when I woke up. "What do you want me to do? Smash the lock and risk paying for damages?" Her shoulders tensed, and I could feel the argument building before she even opened her mouth. "It's not just the noise, Jason," she said, turning to face me fully now. "It's the voices." "They're faint," I replied, brushing her concern aside. "It's probably just some talk show or something." "You don't know that," she snapped, her voice rising. "It's creepy, it's weird, and you're acting like it's normal." "I'm not saying it's normal," I said, my patience wearing thin. "But I'm not going to lose my mind over a busted radio in an old house either." Her eyes narrowed, and she stepped closer, her voice low and sharp. "You're always like this. You act like I'm crazy for being upset. Like everything's my fault because I can't just relax like you." "That's not fair, Claire," I said, my jaw tightening. "You're acting like I put the damn radio there just to piss you off." "Maybe you didn't, but you sure as hell aren't doing anything about it." I opened my mouth to fire back when something stopped me. A voice crackled through the static, clearer and louder than anything we'd heard so far. "You think I'm the one making this harder than it has to be? You're impossible to talk to, Claire." I froze. Claire's eyes widened as she stared at me, her face pale. "Did you hear that?" I hesitated, trying to process what I'd just heard. It's nothing, probably just... Don't, she said, her voice trembling. Don't tell me that wasn't you. It wasn't me, I insisted. It's... Jason, that was exactly what you said to me yesterday. The static broke again like a scratched record, and the voice resumed, now faint but unmistakable. Stop putting this all on me, Claire. You're just imagining things. I didn't go anywhere tonight. I took a step back, my stomach twisting. It wasn't just the words. It was the cadence, the exact rhythm of my voice. Claire's hands trembled as she pressed them to her forehead. It's you, you're doing this, she said, her voice sharp and brittle. You're trying to mess with me, with my emotions. Do you think it's funny? What? No, I said, my own voice rising now. Claire, how could I even... You've been trying to fix this trip from the beginning, haven't you? She spat. She began to hyperventilate. Like we could just patch everything up if somehow you controlled the situation. I'm not controlling anything. The static surged, loud enough to make my ears ring, and through it came another burst of words, this time in Claire's voice. You're so damn selfish, Jason. You only care about fixing things on your terms. Her face crumpled as the words registered, and she looked at me like she'd been slapped. That's from last summer, she whispered. When we fought about my job offer. That's me. I opened my mouth to deny it, to tell her she was wrong, but then I heard it again. Her voice warped but unmistakable, repeating the exact words I'd heard her yell during that fight. You want to fix everything, Jason? Why don't you fix yourself first? It wasn't just random, it was us. I backed up against the counter, my pulse pounding in my ears. What the hell is going on? Claire shook her head, her face pale and her hands still trembling. I don't know. I don't want to hear it anymore. She turned and stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the bedroom door behind her. I stood there, staring at the ceiling where the faint sound of static hummed steadily through the boards. A chill ran down my spine as the sound shifted, and for a moment I thought I could hear the creak of footsteps from above. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to keep me rooted in place, staring up at the locked attic door, as Claire's garbled voice echoed through the attic again. I don't know why I ever married you. Time blurred into itself, the storm outside returning to bury the cabin in deeper drifts of snow, and the sound upstairs filling our world with a ceaseless mocking static. At times it would go quiet, just long enough for Claire and me to let our guards down, consider talking about something, anything beyond our own misery. But right when I thought we might have a chance at conversation, the radio would crackle back to life, louder and more intrusive than before. It was a few days in when I realized that it wasn't just replaying our worst arguments anymore. It was anything we'd spoken to or about each other. I heard my own voice from months ago telling a friend how Claire doesn't see me, how she makes everything a battle. A while later it shifted to Claire's voice, raw and sobbing, confiding in her sister that she didn't know how much longer she could endure me. I recognized every word, every breath, because I remembered her phone call that night. She'd locked herself in the bathroom and I'd pressed my ear against the door. I had never regretting being nosy as much as that night. Here it was, echoing through the attic laid bare. Every time the voice became clearer, I'd see Claire's face tighten, a tortured mix of guilt and fury. We couldn't escape each other's taunts or the house's apparent need to throw them at us like daggers. We hardly said a word to each other, circling each other in the small cabin, surviving on canned soup and stale crackers. I tried calling the owner again and again, leaving voicemails that grew more frantic with each attempt. My calls went unreturned, my hope dwindling with each missed connection. Claire's phone signal was the next to go. She'd tried to scroll through social media, text her friends, anything to distract herself. But no matter where she stood or where she tried, her phone could barely muster one bar. She sank onto the couch, eyes full of tears that she refused to let fall in front of me. We have to leave, she whispered on our 5th day in the cabin, her voice trembling as she stared at the swirling white chaos through the window. Jason, I can't stay here anymore. We had discussed leaving the day before, but the weather had barely permitted us to open the front door. It hadn't let up much since then, but the desperation in her voice shook me. Without another word, we bundled up, thick coats, gloves, scarves. I helped tie her boots. There was something almost tender in the gesture, and for a moment I wondered if we could reconcile, to pull ourselves out of this nightmare by sheer force of will. But stepping outside was like entering a frozen void. The wind whipped icy needles of snow at our faces, and the driveway was half buried in drifts. I dug at the car door, yanking the icy handle open only to find the interior of the car felt as cold and lifeless as the air around us. The engine refused to turn over, coughing twice before going silent. I glanced at Claire. Her eyes darted to the steep, unpaved road that snaked down the mountain. Even if the car started, we'd be risking our lives trying to maneuver those icy curves. We looked at each other, and I knew she felt as defeated as I did. We trudged back to the cabin, fighting each step through the wind. My fingers had gone numb in spite of my gloves. Claire was shivering violently, a silent terror in her eyes. When I finally managed to force the swollen cabin door open, that now familiar static rushed out to greet us. And then I heard it. Claire's voice upstairs, as usual, speaking words I wished I'd never have to hear. She sounded almost gentle, but her words were damning. "I'll leave him soon," she said, her tone calm and intimate. "He doesn't have a clue." My heart lurched. Real or not, it felt like a blade twisting in my gut. I glanced at her. Her eyes were wide, tears threatening to spill, the betrayal fresh even though those words were her own. She looked at me, shook her head, and without speaking, retreated to the bedroom, shutting the door quietly behind her. I stood there, snow melting on my boots, face stinging from the cold, and listened to the static pick up again. The cabin creaked in the wind, sounding almost like a soft, mocking laugh. I could only stare at the dying embers in the fireplace, wondering if anything in our lives would survive this place. As the relentless static from the attic wore on, it seemed to scrape away at the edges of my sanity. The voices unearthed every bitter line, every whispered complaint we thought safely hidden. The cabin felt like a cage, trapping us with an auditory barrage that knew no bounds. Each new revelation, whether a conversation once held secret or a venomous whisper shared in confidence, added weight to an already unbearable tension. "You're just too much, Jason. Always fixing, never listening." Exhausted and desperate, I found myself fixated on the attic. The padlock, an old, rusted relic, mocked me from the ceiling hatch, a barrier to whatever twisted machine perpetuated our torment. I needed to get it open, needed to find out what was happening, but every traditional method had failed. No amount of pleading with the unresponsive owner or searching for a misplaced key had yielded any results. It was just Claire and me, growing more estranged with each passing hour. "If you're going to stay this distant forever, Claire, you might as well just leave." Determined, I approached the hatch again, armed with nothing but a sense of determination. I grabbed a chair from the kitchen, positioning it under the attic's pull-down string. The padlock dangled just out of reach, an enigmatic sentinel guarding our tormentor. Did I even want to find out what was up there? The need to stop the voices overpowered any hesitation. I fetched a small toolbox from under the kitchen sink, the one that barely saw use, and rummaged through it for anything that might help. I came up with a couple of old screwdrivers and a tarnished set of Allen keys. Not ideal, but it was all I had. "Why bother, Jason? It's over, isn't it?" I ignored the jibes, focusing on the padlock. I tried each tool systematically, twisting and prodding in a futile attempt to force the mechanism. I eventually gave up on trying to break open the lock, and in my desperation resorted to trying any and every combination I could think of. My hands, raw from the metal and the cold that seeped into the cabin, worked mechanically. Time lost meaning as I moved from one combination to the next, fueled by a mix of fury and a desperate need for silence. Hours must have passed, the light outside dimming to the early twilight that predicted another long night. The numbers blurred before my eyes, each click a mockery as our voices cried from above. "She's going to leave, you know. Can't you tell?" My brother's voice seemed to boom down at me from above. I winced as I anticipated my next words. "Let her. I don't need this hassle any longer." The frustration and shame built within me like a physical force, a crescendo that demanded release. As I furiously put in every 4-digit combination I could think of, the realization hit me like a brick. I stopped on a new combination, 1231. Today's date, but more importantly, our wedding anniversary. A detail that had slipped from my conscious mind but lay buried, a remnant of happier times. With all of the remaining effort my frigid, tired hand could muster, I pulled. The lock clicked open. Relief washed over me, quickly chased by apprehension. What would I find up there? Claire had arisen from the couch and watched, her face a mask of mingled fear and curiosity. Her silence was a gulf between us, but this act, opening the attic, felt like the first truly shared moment in days. I pulled the string and the ladder creaked down, dust dancing in the air disturbed by its descent. We both flinched at the sharp echoing sound of the radio, clear as day, coming from above. I hesitated, my hand on the ladder. The air felt charged, thick with the anticipation of what was yet to come. The static above us quieted for a moment, as if the attic itself held its breath. "What are you afraid of, Jason? You're a coward. Just run away from it all. Isn't that what you always do?" With a deep breath, I started to climb. The ladder groaned under my weight, each step a creak of old wood. Claire stayed below, her face upturned, watching me ascend into the darkness above. As I approached the top, the chill of the attic wrapped around me, a cold whisper against my skin. I paused, flashlight in hand, ready to sweep away the shadows and uncover the source of our torment. I couldn't bring myself to turn it on to see what was up here, at least not alone. Instead, I turned it down towards my wife and extended my hand down to help her up. As Claire and I reached the final step of the attic ladder, a chilling silence enveloped us, broken only by the echo of our hesitant footsteps on the floor. It didn't feel like the rest of the cabin. It felt cheap and warm. Linoleum? The beam from my flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing a sight that made my heart skip a beat. The sight before us wasn't just impossible, it was chilling. We were back home, in our crappy little apartment, or at least a perfect replica of it. Every detail was meticulously reproduced. The arrangement of books on the shelves, the crease on the sofa cushion, even the small, almost imperceptible stain on the carpet near the TV stand. It was our home, duplicated with an unsettling precision, as if someone had taken a snapshot of our lives and recreated it here in the dusty confines of the attic. The air was unnervingly still, thick with a tension that seemed almost palpable. It felt as if the room was holding its breath, waiting for us to shatter the quiet. The musty smell that I'd noticed when first entering the cabin was amplified to the extreme, and was permeated with an iron metallic scent that sent my stomach churning. My eyes swept the room, searching for the source of the voices that had tormented us. We didn't own any radio, nor a record player or any speakers for that matter. Instead, my gaze landed on something far more familiar, my laptop, open on the coffee table, its screen aglow. I ran over to the battered device, tripping over its power cord as I went. The laptop sat neatly on the table as the mouse plugged into it moved of its own accord, clicking the screen every few seconds. My eyes darted to the smudged screen and discovered that it was open to our security app. I'd installed cheap cameras around the apartment soon after we moved in. I'd told Claire that they were for our own safety, but in truth, they were for me. To revisit our arguments, to replay every fight we had, searching for vindication in the details. The computer was clicking from clip to clip, playing a highlight reel of every terrible thing we'd ever said to or about each other. Claire joined me, her steps slow, almost reluctant. Her eyes widened in horror as she watched the screen. I looked back down at the laptop, only to realize that it had changed once again. I immediately recognized the fight. It was the most recent one before we'd left home. "Claire, would you listen to me? It's 2 weeks you'll live. It'll be nice and quiet." "Who says I even want nice and quiet? I want to get back to real life, Jason. I haven't worked in months, and you planning these surprise trips to try to patch things isn't helping me find a job." "So what? I cancel the booking? I already paid the deposit, Claire. We can't get that money back. Or did you forget I'm also working a dead-end job? If you want to book that stupid anniversary trip, go right ahead. You just bulldoze ahead like what you want is the only thing that matters." I watched myself furrow my brow and then put my head in my hand. "Claire, I'm trying here, I really am. But I can never get through to you, can I? First it was you passing on the job offer when we needed that money. Then it was that thing with your ex. I told you nothing happened, Jason. He just stopped by for coffee is all. Claire, I'm not stupid. You turned off the cameras, but the audio was still recording, you idiot. Don't you dare call me an idiot after all I've done for you." I watched as Claire had stormed towards me, and our fight was about to escalate. She pounced at me, but I threw her off of me towards the kitchen. I watched her crack her head on the edge of the table and fall through it. I walked up to the table slowly. I observed her breathing grow shallow as she lay spasming on the floor. I watched her breathing stop as blood slowly pooled around her. I watched myself stand up calmly, then walk into our bedroom. A minute later, I left, quietly wheeling our luggage towards the front door and leaving as my wife lay motionless. Then, as if sensing its audience had seen enough, the laptop's battery icon flashed once, critical, and the screen went black. The sudden death of the device plunged me back into silence and darkness, a quiet so deep it was almost suffocating. The absence of the voices, which had been such a constant and invasive presence, now left a shallow emptiness that was somehow worse than the noise. I sat for a moment, unable to process what I'd just seen. I turned my flashlight up towards Claire, only to see that I was now alone in the room, the dull smell of iron growing ever stronger from the kitchen. I shakily turned my flashlight again, this time towards the kitchen table, shrouded in a cloak of darkness that I hadn't dared breach since I ascended the attic ladder. There, lying crumpled in a heap of splintered wood, lay my wife. Dried blood had pooled around her head, and I winced at noticing that her neck was bent at an unnatural angle. She had begun to bloat and stiffen, and the closer I stepped, the more the iron scent of blood was replaced with a musky, rotted smell. She was almost entirely a corpse, save for her eyes. Fresh and watery, they were locked onto me, silently accusing me. "Claire?" I whispered, praying with every fiber that somehow she was still in there. But she didn't respond, didn't move. She lay frozen, staring intently, eyes following me as I nervously swayed. The air around us grew colder, denser, as if the room itself was closing in, feeding off the rising panic. Then, almost imperceptibly, Claire began to whisper. The words were soft, disjointed murmurs at first, guttural sounds forcing their way out of a broken, bloated throat. As I drew closer, the whispers grew clearer, sharper. They were not the comforting words I yearned for, but a continuation of the cascade of cruel, cutting phrases I'd grown accustomed to. "You never really cared, did you, Jason? It was always about you, your needs." Her voice was a ghost, devoid even of its usual disdain, hollow and haunting. I stood, frozen, as her whispers intensified, layering upon each other in a relentless, cold assault. "You're so selfish. You think you're the victim, always playing the martyr." Each word sliced through the already frigid air. The whispers swelled into a torrent of accusations. "You suffocate me, Jason. I can't breathe with you, can't grow. You're a dead weight dragging me down into your misery." I stumbled backward, hands clamped over my ears, but it was futile. Stop it, Claire. Please get up. This isn't okay. Please get up. You should have known I was too good for you. I wasted the best years of my life on a fantasy that you'd change." Her face so familiar and yet so warped, contorted as her dead lips struggled to keep up with the verbal onslaught. The storm outside seemed to echo her fury, the wind howling against the walls as if in sympathy with her rage. Overwhelmed and unable to bear it, I dropped to my knees, the cold of the floor seeping into my bones. Claire's figure, crumpled across from mine, began to crunch as her frame contorted itself so she could continue to lock eyes with me. Her expression was blank, but her eyes piecing as she continued her litany of grievances. I crawled, sobbing, searching in the dark for the attic door that led me here, but it had long vanished. The floor was solid. As the roar of the frozen world outside began to muffle, snow piling against our artificial windows, her voice was the only sound, a relentless echo in the ghostly replica of our apartment. Her words didn't stop for hours, and by the time she began to quiet, she had managed to stand up and loom over me, cold and pale, whispering accusations and curses at me in the dark. It has been weeks since the door to the outside vanished, leaving me trapped in my own home with the whispering thing that was once my wife. Claire, or the thing that used to be her, grows more gaunt by the day, her features sharpening, her eyes sinking deeper into her skull. She's starting to smell worse, but she keeps whispering. She isn't going to harm me, not physically. She can't. Her body, crumbling and decaying, only has the energy to torment me with its gaze and with its words. I've tried the front door, but I don't think it's any more than decoration in this mockery of my home. It doesn't lead outside, it doesn't even open. It's just part of the wall. The storm outside has not abated. I can hear it sometimes, through the thick snow that covers my windows. If the snow ever subsides, the windows may be my only chance at escape. I'm typing this now as both a record and a plea. If you're reading this, if this somehow finds its way to someone, anyone, do you know when the blizzard near Denver will let up? Is there any forecast about when the snow will start to melt? It's cold in here, and I don't think I can listen to her for much longer. I'm a horror novelist from Surrey. though I rather wish I'd stuck to writing cozy mysteries after what I've witnessed. My agent keeps ringing asking about my next manuscript. If she only knew why I've missed my deadline. I suppose I should write this down, though my hands won't stop trembling as I type. A month ago, I traveled to Mo Forest seeking inspiration. Writer's block had been plaguing me for months, and my publisher was growing rather impatient. I'd heard whispers about this particular forest on various paranormal forums, tales of mysterious disappearances and unexplained phenomena. Perfect research material, or so I thought. I arrived in the nearby village on a dreary Tuesday afternoon, the sort of place where everyone knows everyone and outsiders stick out like a sore thumb. The locals at the King's Arms pub fell silent when I walked in, though that might have been due to my London accent rather than any particular prejudice. "Looking for a room," I said to the barman, a weathered fellow with hands like old leather. "Somewhere quiet, preferably near the forest." He paused in his endless glass-wiping routine, fixing me with a peculiar stare. "Planning to go into the woods, are you?" "Research for a book," I explained, settling onto a creaky bar stool. "I write horror novels." A few of the locals exchanged meaningful glances. An elderly man in the corner actually crossed himself. "You seem a sensible sort," the barman said, leaning forward, "so take my advice. If you hear chains dragging through the leaves at night, run. Don't look back, just run." Naturally, being the sort of fool who writes horror for a living, I pressed him for details. That's when I first heard about the judge. "Bloody tall fellow he is," the barman continued, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. "Wears this peculiar coat with patterns sewn into it, like something from one of them Eastern European countries. Hat with feathers too. But it's his eyes you'd notice first. Green they are, like poison." An old woman at the end of the bar suddenly joined in. "My herald saw him, he did. 3 years ago, just before he—" She fell silent, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "The chains," another patron added. "That's how you know he's coming. Then he says that word. Guilty," the barman finished. "If you hear that, well, best start praying for dawn." I spent that night in a room above the pub, scribbling notes and searching online for any mention of similar legends. Nothing quite matched what I'd heard, though I did find several news reports about unexplained disappearances in the forest over the past 3 decades. The next morning, I rented a rustic cabin 5 kilometers into the forest. The estate agent seemed almost relieved to have someone take it, even at a suspiciously low rate. "It's yours for as long as you need," she said, avoiding eye contact as she handed over the keys. Though most folks don't stay more than a night or two. The cabin itself was a rather dilapidated affair, though sturdy enough. A single-room structure with weathered logs and a tin roof that creaked ominously in the wind. The rusty padlock on the door was oddly unlocked, swinging gently despite the lack of breeze. Inside, the air hung thick with the musty smell of abandonment. Just an iron bed, a weathered wardrobe, and a wooden desk that had seen better days. Perfect for a writer's retreat, I thought at the time. How bloody wrong I was. That first night, I dozed off while working on my laptop. What I saw in my dreams. Christ, I wish I could convince myself it was just a nightmare. A young couple had taken shelter in the cabin. The lad was trying to impress his girlfriend, showing off like young men do. They'd been drinking. I could see the wine bottle they'd brought. The girl was giggling, perched on the edge of the very bed I'd been sleeping in moments before. That's when I heard it. The sound of chains dragging across dead leaves, like something massive being pulled through the underbrush. The temperature plummeted so quickly I could see their breath crystallizing in the moonlight. The wine in their bottle froze solid, the glass cracking with a sharp ping. The door didn't just open, it was torn from its hinges. He stood there, the judge, all 2 meters of him, his feathered hat brushing the doorframe. Those eyes, imagine absinthe mixed with corpse light. His coat seemed to shift and writhe in patterns that hurt my eyes to look at. Guilty. The words seemed to echo from 1,000 throats at once. The anchor at the end of his chain moved faster than I could track. When it struck the young man's head, the sound... Bloody hell, it was like a watermelon being dropped onto concrete, but worse. So much worse. I watched his skull cave in, fragments of bone mixing with other things. His body twitched, fingers scrabbling at the floorboards, leaving bloody trails. The girl tried to scream, but that ashen hand caught her throat. It was the color of old gravestones, and I swear I could see movement under the skin, like worms writhing beneath the surface. Then those other hands appeared, growing from his shoulders like some hideous fungus. 3 withered things, each clutching their tools. The scissors made a wet snicking sound as they severed her windpipe. I could hear the cartilage being snipped, like someone cutting through thick rubber bands. The chisel, Christ, I could hear her skull crack like an egg, see the fragments sink into the soft tissue beneath. And the saw, the sound it made as it worked through flesh and bone, like a rusty gate being opened in hell. I woke up drenched in sweat, my laptop's battery dead. The room was freezing, and I could smell something metallic in the air. When I checked the floor where the couple had, in my dream, I found dark stains in the wood that looked disturbingly fresh. The next day I tried to convince myself it was just a nightmare brought on by the local stories. I spent the morning in the village library, researching the forest's history. The elderly librarian, Mrs. Pembroke, seemed unusually interested in my research. "Looking up the old stories, are you?" she asked, bringing me a stack of local newspapers. "About the judge?" I nodded, and she glanced around before continuing. "My sister's boy. He was one of them that disappeared. 1987 it was. They found his shoes by that cabin, but nothing else. Never did find his body." The newspapers told a grim story. Over 3 decades, 27 people had vanished in the forest. The only connection? They'd all been last seen near the cabin. The most recent case was just 6 months ago. A poacher caught setting illegal traps. That night I had another dream. Or perhaps nightmare isn't quite the right word. It felt too real, too visceral. The poacher was counting his snares when the temperature dropped. Frost crept across the cabin's windows like skeletal fingers. The chains scraped across the forest floor, and I noticed something disturbing. The sound wasn't just getting closer. It was coming from multiple directions, as if the chains were circling the cabin. When the judge appeared this time, I noticed new details. His coat. The patterns weren't sewn in at all. They were moving, shifting like faces trying to push through the fabric. Faces contorted in agony. The poacher tried to run, fool. The anchor caught his leg, shattering his knee with a sound like branches breaking in winter. He screamed, God, how he screamed, as the judge dragged him back. Those 3 withered hands emerged from the judge's shoulders. But this time I saw the process in horrific detail. The skin split like overripe fruit, yellow fluid seeping out as the hands pushed through. Each finger unfurled like a blooming corpse flower. The scissors took his fingers first, one by one, like pruning dead twigs. Snip, 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 the chisel. It worked methodically, tapping through joints and ligaments with surgical precision. The saw, it started at his ankles, and, Christ, I can still hear his pleas for mercy. I woke to find my notebook filled with drawings I didn't remember making. Detailed sketches of the judge, of his victims, of those damned hands. The pages were damp, though not with water. They smelled of copper. Over the next few days, I tried to leave. I really did. But each time I packed my bag, something drew me back. The dreams kept coming, each more vivid than the last. A pair of thieves dividing their spoils. A drunk driver who'd fled the scene of an accident. A man who'd abandoned his family. Each night, the judge found them. Each night, I watched. And each morning, I found more evidence that these weren't just dreams. Bloodstains that appeared and disappeared. Scratches in the wood that weren't there before. Once I found a single feather from his hat, black as sin and cold as death. I started researching the judge himself. In the village records, I found something interesting. In 1888, a circuit judge had died in these woods. He'd been known for his harsh sentences, for finding guilt where others saw innocence. They found his body hanging from a tree, surrounded by the families of those he'd condemned. But here's the detail that chills me. Around his neck was an iron chain, and in his hands were 3 tools: scissors, a chisel, and a saw. The librarian had more to share. "They say," she whispered, "that before each execution he ordered, he'd whisper guilty in a voice that made even the guards shiver. And his eyes, witnesses said they glowed with an unholy green light. I should have left then, should have run as far as I could, but I had to know more, had to understand. Last night, everything changed. I'd fallen asleep at my desk, researching as usual, when something woke me. Not a dream this time. The temperature in the cabin had dropped so low that my breath came out in white clouds. My laptop screen frosted over, then died. That's when I noticed. The chains weren't just in my dreams anymore. I could hear them dragging through the leaves outside, that horrible scraping sound coming from all directions. But there was something else too. Something I'd never heard in my dreams. Whispers. Dozens of voices, maybe hundreds, all speaking at once in a language I couldn't understand. The voices grew louder, and I realized with horror that they were coming from the judge's coat. All those shifting patterns. They were faces. The faces of his victims, trapped in the fabric, endlessly whispering their pleas for mercy. Guilty. The word froze the blood in my veins. He was here, standing in the doorway, larger than I remembered. Those poison green eyes fixed on me, and I understood something terrible. He'd known I was watching. All those dreams, all those executions, he'd been performing them for me, drawing me in, making me complicit. The ashen hand reached for me, and I saw what I hadn't noticed before. It bore a wedding ring. The same ring I'd seen on the hand of that judge in the old photographs from 1888. His other hands emerged, those twisted things clutching their tools. But this time, I saw what the tools really were. Not metal at all, but bone. Human bone, fashioned into instruments of torture. I ran, through the back window into the forest. The chains followed, scraping through the undergrowth like serpents. Every direction I turned, I heard them. The whispers grew louder, became screams. I found myself back at the cabin. Of course, you can't escape the judge, not when he's decided you're guilty. And I am guilty, aren't I? I watched. Night after night, I watched his executions, took notes, drew pictures, never tried to help, never tried to stop him. Just observed like some damned voyeur of violence. It's 3:17 a.m. now. I'm huddled under the bed in this bloody cabin, typing this on my mobile. 7% battery left. The temperature's dropping rapidly. I can see frost forming on the floorboards. The chains are getting closer. The whispers are back. I can make out words now. Watch like you watched us. Footsteps outside, that word again. Guilty. The door's opening. I can see his polished shoes by the bed. The chains are scraping across the floor, and bloody hell. Is that an ashen hand reaching under the bed? The fingers are bent all wrong like broken twigs, and they're reaching for my... My name is David, I say to the circle of gentle, encouraging faces, and I want to be a better person. Hi, David, they respond in unison. Their voices blend perfectly, too perfectly, like a practiced choir. It's my first time at Better Persons Anonymous. The flyer appeared on my windshield 3 days ago. Struggling with who you are, want to be better? Join us. Wednesdays, 8 p.m., no judgment, no past required. I chose this basement meeting over the court-mandated anger management sessions. The judge gave me a choice after the incident at my daughter's soccer game. I still maintain that referee was wrong, that he was deliberately targeting Emma. The restraining order was excessive. Carol, the group facilitator, nods at me. Her smile never reaches her eyes. Share your story, David. I dot. I stop, studying the faces around me. 12 people evenly spaced in a perfect circle. Their postures mirror each other unconsciously. Or is it unconscious? I lost my temper again. It's been happening more since Susan left, since she took Emma. Would you say you've always struggled with anger? Carol asks. Her pen hovers over a notepad, but she hasn't written anything all evening. Number yes, maybe. I rub my face. It's like there's this other person inside me sometimes, someone I don't recognize. A murmur of understanding ripples through the circle. When I look up, everyone is nodding at exactly the same angle. The first step, Carol says, is recognizing the person you want to be. Close your eyes, David. Picture your ideal self. I comply, feeling slightly foolish. What do you see? I see someone calmer, someone who didn't make his 8-year-old daughter cry at her soccer game, someone Susan wouldn't have left. Good. Carol's voice comes from closer now. Hold on to that image, that better person, that better David. Something cold touches my forehead. My eyes snap open. Carol stands directly in front of me, her finger pressed between my eyebrows. The others have risen from their chairs, forming a tighter circle around me. Their faces are still smiling, still gentle, but their eyes are empty. What? I try to stand, but my body won't respond. The treatment has begun, Carol says. Her finger feels like ice against my skin. You want to be a better person, David. We're going to help you. I changed my mind, I managed to say. I'll take the anger management classes. Oh, David. Carol's smile widens impossibly. No one ever changes their mind here, that's the whole point. The others step closer. I notice for the first time that they all have the same posture, the same walk, like puppets moved by the same hand. You see, Carol continues, her icy finger tracing patterns on my forehead. We've perfected the art of becoming better people. We've found that the easiest way to improve someone is to simply replace them. My vision blurs. The room seems to ripple. The human consciousness is surprisingly portable, she explains, like software that can be overwritten. We simply remove the problematic elements, anger, fear, weakness, and install something better, something perfect. You're insane, I whisper, but I can feel it starting. A numbness spreading from where her finger touches my skin, seeping into my thoughts. No, David, we're better, and soon you will be too. She gestures to the circle. Look at your future friends. Look how calm they are, how perfect. I look, really look. Behind their identical smiles, I see it now. The emptiness, the absence of anything real. And in that moment, I understand the true horror. These aren't people who became better. These are people who were erased. The anger you feel right now, Carol says softly, that'll be the first thing to go. Then the fear. Then the love. It's surprisingly counterproductive to perfection. Then the memories that make you imperfect, Susan, Emma. All those messy human things. Please, I beg, feeling my thoughts begin to fade. My daughter will have a much better father, Carol finishes. One who never loses his temper, one who smiles and nods and agrees, one who's perfect. The numbness reaches my memories. I see Emma's face beginning to blur, like a photograph left in the sun. Who? I struggle to hold on to myself. Who are you? Carol's smile finally reaches her eyes, and I wish it hadn't. Behind her practiced expression, I see something ancient. Something that watched humans struggle with their imperfections for eons and decided to help in the worst possible way. We are the better ones, she says. We've been improving people for a very long time, slowly, carefully, one support group at a time. My vision darkens at the edges. The last thing I see is my reflection in the window. My face already beginning to smooth into that same peaceful expression all the others wear. My last human thought is of Emma, and I try to scream. But better people don't scream. Better people smile. Better people nod. Better people agree. Welcome, Carol says to the thing that used to be David, to your better self. The circle is complete again. 13 perfect smiles. 13 empty gazes. 13 better people. Outside, more flyers flutter in the wind, carried to more windshields, more doorsteps, more desperate people seeking improvement. After all, everyone wants to be a better person, and the better ones are always happy to help. Always. I'm dying of lung cancer and everyone's happy about it. That's what really frightens me. Not the diagnosis, but the people on this godforsaken island. I'm going to die here, and they're actively rejoicing. I've lost my sanity, as if it weren't already enough to be dying, glacially and agonizingly for that matter. I'm reaching out to Reddit because I think my relatives, friends, and neighbors have collectively lost their humanity. Please, for the love of all that is good in this world, say something normal, empathetic, and fucking sane. I won't identify myself or my location for obvious reasons, but know that this isle is little more than a skerry, a pebble in the ocean, bound to the mainland by no more than one daily ferry at 3 in the afternoon. Horribly, thanks to my decaying body, I lack the physical strength to leave this place. I barely have the strength to leave my house, and nobody here is helping me. They're just watching me die, slowly, day by day. Except they're not just watching. They're the ones who did this to me. To explain, my mainland friends, from my old job and university, have always called the island folk cultists, and I've long struggled to argue with that claim. After all, I was nearly entirely ostracized by the people of the island as a whole, for leaving this rock to go and study in the city. That broke the rules. They're savage, unwritten rules. People are born here and they're buried here. That's just the way it goes. Anyhow, 2 years ago, after I, 31 meters, lost my job in the city, I returned home on a ferry, tail between my legs. The islanders welcomed me back with closed arms. Still, the fact that they let me back at all was somewhat of a blessing. I moved into my brother's house, and over time he, Chris, helped me to make amends with the other villagers for deserting them. After a year or so, things started to seem normal again, but I may not be the best judge. I grew up here, so normal to me might not be normal to you. As I lie in my bed, reduced to a shadow, I realized that I've always overlooked oddities about this place and its people. Oddities that I certainly didn't notice until last Tuesday when I started coughing up blood. To find yourself kneeling over a toilet bowl, near puking a stream of thick, bloody phlegm, is a horror I struggled to put into words. There had been no symptoms leading up to that. At 8 on Tuesday morning, I woke with a sudden gnawing sensation in my body, from head to toes, and a scratch at the top of my esophagus, as if something had dug its nails into my throat from the inside. By the afternoon, I was struggling from shortness of breath, so I phoned the island clinic and booked an appointment with Dr. Arnold. And I do vaguely recall, whilst I locked my brother's front door, seeing a smudge of mud splattered against the glass pane. It was a neat circle with a splattering of muddy specks in the middle, clustering more densely as they neared the top of the ring, forming a sort of brown gradient. A kid probably kicked a ball at the door, I decided as I scurried to my car. When I arrived at the clinic on that Tuesday afternoon, a little before dusk, I was greeted by a smiling Dr. Arnold. He x-rayed my chest and spotted a white-gray mass. Then he gave me the dire news. Lung cancer, I hoarsely repeated, throat stinging from the blood I'd been hacking up. No, please. Oh, Joshua, the doctor interjected with an eye roll before saying the most unnerving thing of all. Relax, we all have a little bit of cancer. And I failed to utter anything in response. Instead, my mind overextended itself in an effort to process the lunacy of what this fully certified doctor had just said to me. Maybe he means that our cells are always mutating, I thought. No, that wasn't what he said. He said, we all have a little bit of a cancer. A fucking doctor said that. I would have chalked it up to incompetence, medical negligence. However, at the risk of sounding like a conspiracy theorist, I knew it was more than that, and now a week later I'm absolutely certain. It was something in Dr. Arnold's pupils. As I walked out of his office, I noticed a glint in those beady eyes, and his grin was not a kind one, not in the slightest. Then again, I didn't and don't know Dr. Arnold well. He's only been the doctor on our island for the past 4 years, and I've only been here for the past 2. I've missed a lot. I was away from the island for most of my 20s. Maybe his face doesn't match his thoughts, I considered. But I knew full well that there had been intent in those eyes. Horrid intent. Anyway, I drove back to my brother's house and I told him the awful news. Chris is a good man. He's kind, caring, and sensitive. He cried 7 years ago when I rang to tell him that I'd crashed my motorbike and broken my leg. I just want to point that out before I explain what happened next. I have lung cancer, I croaked. My brother was washing the plates, but he stopped abruptly, the second I uttered the word cancer. I expected the floodgates to part, much as they had after my motorcycle accident, and there were tears, just not sad ones. On that face, he wore a smile like the one I'd just seen on Dr. Arnold. Are you serious, Josh? Chris half whispered, seeming to hold back a giggle. Yes, I answered slowly. Are you okay? Your face looks... What? How does it look? He asked, tears trickling from his eyes. Gleeful eyes. This is a blessing. I wish I had your gift. It'd make life so much easier. Let me show you. Chris shot across the room at such speed. The orange glow of dusk coming through the kitchen window revealed only a little of his giddy lips overflowing with froth. This rabid thing, once my brother, seized a clump of my hair, then started to thrust my body forwards like a battering ram. Let's get all of that good stuff out of you, shall we? He started to roar as we neared the kitchen sink. It's a blessing from Ralkin. I began to cry. What the fuck are you... His fingers cut my protest short when they rammed down my throat, provoking my gag reflex. Then I threw up more red phlegm in a gushing flow that stained the water and soapy plates beneath my face. With bloodshot eyes and saliva-coated lips, I fearfully pleaded, Stop. Oh, it's beautiful, Chris interrupted, swirling his fingers in the bloody muck I just coughed up into the water. Just like he said it would be. I noticed it on his wrist, a wound, a red circle cut into his flesh filled with a gradient of dots pricked by something sharp, the symbol from the door. I screamed with closed lips as my face was dunked into the water, but I involuntarily choked out a few more drops of blood into the red. the polluted water which, horrifyingly, engulfed me. Then Chris dug his fingers more deeply into my hair, hoisted me out of the bloody filth in the sink, and lifted me to eye level with the kitchen window. "Ralkin," my brother whispered, "you're so fortunate." Standing in the near dark of Chris's back garden, barely revealed by the last dregs of red from a setting sun, was something that broadened my petrified eyes. A man. Only, he didn't look like a man at all. The figure wore a black hooded trench coat hiding what one would assume to be a human form, but his face betrayed him. It was covered in tumors the size of fists. 2 dark pinpricks, eyes I think, were sitting in tight crannies, squished uncomfortably between the tumors, those bulbous blobs of green, swollen skin, and his discolored skin grew darker towards the top of his face. The symbol represented this man's deformed face. Suddenly, my giggling, deranged brother slammed my head against the rounded edge of the kitchen counter, and all fell to black. When I woke, I found myself on the kitchen floor of a pitch-black house, and Josh was gone. It's been 7 days, and he hasn't returned. Every morning, my condition worsens. My body weakens. Even lumbering down to the kitchen for food and water is painful. My skin and my bones seem to be withering. Before all of this, on that Tuesday evening after Chris attacked me, I rang Lindsay, the island's ferry woman. She picked up. Lindsay always picks up. She lives by that old corded phone in her living room. Another thing that she will always do, if one only asks, is take a trip to the mainland, even after the official 3 o'clock voyage. Much like Chris, however, she wasn't herself. "No, Joshua," the old lady hissed near breathlessly from the other end of the landline. "I don't think he would like you to go ashore." She hung up and she hasn't taken my calls since. I don't have the strength to steal a boat. Certainly don't have the strength to paddle to the mainland. My old friends haven't been picking up the phone or answering their messages, which is concerning. So now I'm turning to the internet. What do? I'm coughing up my fucking lungs. The island's gone insane. I've tried to tell myself that the man in the garden is just some poor, unwell person. Unwell like my brother Lindsay and Dr. Arnold. Unwell like me, perhaps. But there's more to it than that. Collective hysteria is sweeping across the island. Even the fucking postman slipped some blank envelopes through my letterbox at the weekend. They each bore that circular symbol smeared in blood. I'm haunted by the toothy smile and waving hand he offered from the other side of the front door's frosted pane. So many questions are whirring through my mind. Do I even have lung cancer? Has somebody done something else to me? I saw Chris in the garden last night, looking up at me. I don't know why he's left me on my own. Please, somebody comment something quickly. Now, right fucking now. I need help.